Hey guys, tonight we drift somewhere ancient, quiet, and a little confusing, back to the days of cracked clay tablets, smoky oil lamps, and the occasional priest-king who thought he could speak to the gods through a sheep's liver. You're standing under a Mesopotamian sky, where stars twinkle like someone's dropped glitter on a carpet of ink, and the air smells of barley, soot, and ceremonial incense. Civilization has just invented writing, and already people are arguing over grain taxes, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly along the banks of the Euphrates, your sandals squishing into mud that's older than any book you've ever read. It clings to your soles, thick and cool, the kind of ancient muck that once birthed cities and swallowed kings. On your left, a reed hut leans slightly to one side, smoke curling from a small oven where someone is baking flatbread on heated clay. On your right looms a ziggurat, stepped, towering, weathered by centuries of sandstorms and sun, rising in careful layers like a tired wedding cake made of dust and stone. The air is warm, but the breeze off the river is kind. You squint through the shimmer of rising heat. Beyond the reeds lies a village, scattered huts, the occasional goat bleating, children chasing one another with bundles of reeds tied into makeshift dolls. They don't know they're part of something big. Something history-shifting. They're just trying not to get bitten by mosquitoes or scolded by older siblings for spilling the barley again. This is Sumer. Or maybe Akkad. Or possibly Uruk. No one can say for sure. Ancient timelines are slippery things, always squirming out of scholarly hands. Historians still argue whether this place counts as a proper civilization or just a glorified experimental commune with very enthusiastic architects. But to you, right now, it's the edge of the known world. And you've just stepped into a story so old it barely remembers itself. Here, the people worship gods with human needs and cosmic powers. Here, they record laws in baked clay and tell myths where men wrestle lions, and queens descend into the underworld for a week of introspection and chaos. And somewhere in all this, beneath the epic poems and merchant accounts, are the lives of ordinary people. People who didn't write laws or fight monsters. People who just lived. Who woke up, stretched, yawned, complained about the price of fish, and maybe, raised a child who looked different. You step into the shadow of a granary. The walls are stacked with baskets of grain, the air thick with the smell of dust, rot, and rodents doing their best to stay unnoticed. A man is sweeping, slowly, rhythmically, the kind of movement that implies he's been doing this forever. And nearby, playing in a patch of sunlight, is a child. They laugh to themselves, holding a handful of pebbles, examining each one like it contains the secrets of the universe. Their eyes are wide and almond-shaped, their face soft and round, their posture slightly stiff, but their joy is unmistakable. You sit nearby. The child doesn't startle. They glance at you, then hold out a pebble with solemn importance. You take it. It's warm from their palm. You smile. They smile back, then return to their work, arranging stones in a careful circle, then knocking them over with a delighted shriek. You watch for a while, lulled by the rhythm of the river behind you, the hum of insects, the occasional splash of a fish or a child too curious about mud depth. Could this child have Down syndrome? Maybe. Possibly. There's no way to know for sure. But something about their features, their movement, their behavior, it whispers to you. It reminds you of children you've known. Children from now. Children whose chromosomes arranged themselves a little differently, and then you wonder, did anyone notice, back then, not diagnose? There were no microscopes, no biology textbooks, no word for syndrome in any known cuneiform. But people had eyes. They had ears. They had hearts. They saw. The question is, What did they do with what they saw? Archaeologists have found figurines, statuettes, even wall reliefs that depict individuals with facial features some interpret as consistent with Down syndrome. There's a limestone figurine from Nineveh, round-faced, broad-nosed, short limbs. Some scholars think it represents a real person with a condition. Others argue it's just a stylistic quirk of that period's art. Historians still debate whether ancient depictions reflect specific individuals or just generalized forms. You trace your fingers along a wall carving in a temple corridor. Two figures kneel, facing one another. One is larger, draped in ceremonial robes. The other is smaller, barefoot, reaching out. The smaller figure has proportions that feel familiar, a short neck, a gentle expression, hands that seem just slightly wider than they should be. The carving is old, worn smooth in places. But something about it lingers in your mind like a remembered dream. What did people think when a child like this was born? In Mesopotamian culture, birth anomalies weren't always seen through a medical lens. They were read like messages, signs, portents. A baby with fused limbs, missing ears, an unusual cry, all were catalogued and interpreted by priests, not physicians. One such record, the Summa Isbu, is a collection of omens based on physical characteristics. It's like astrology meets speculative pathology, with a twist of divine politics. If a child is born and its fingers are joined, the harvest will fail. If a child has no eyes, the goddess will weep. If a child has 3 arms, the army will march without direction. These weren't diagnoses. They were cosmological statements. The child's body wasn't just flesh, it was a parchment upon which the gods scribbled their moods. So if a child were born with the soft signs we now associate with Down syndrome, slower development, certain facial traits, reduced muscle tone, would they be seen as sacred? Cursed? Neutral? It likely depended on context. Who the family was. What the priests believed. What the stars said that week. History doesn't give us a single answer. You follow a young mother as she carries her baby down a narrow alley of brick and reed. She pauses often, gently wiping the baby's mouth, humming a low tune, adjusting the cloth sling across her shoulder. The baby is quiet, watching the world with wide, slow blinks. They're beautiful and vulnerable. You wonder how many mothers back then whispered prayers that their child be strong, smart, normal. You wonder what they did, how they coped, when the child was not, because life in ancient Mesopotamia was not easy. There were no safety nets, no social services, no inclusive education policies. The fields demanded labor. The household demanded obedience. A child who couldn't help, who struggled to speak or walk or learn at the expected pace, that child could quickly become a burden. Or, in kinder eyes, a mystery. Or a gift, you pass a temple gate. Inside, rows of priests chant, their voices blending into something that feels like wind through stone. In some temples, children with disabilities were raised as sacred. Set apart. Kept within the holy precinct as attendants, or even as living signs of the gods' unpredictable will. It sounds beautiful, almost enlightened. But it also removed them from their families. From normal life. They were seen, yes. Revered, even. But not necessarily understood. You sit at the edge of a square where an elder tells stories to a circle of sleepy children. He speaks of a boy born with the moon in his eyes, who never learned to speak but always smiled. Who once pointed to the river the day before it flooded, and saved his people. The children gasp. The elder chuckles. Is it a fable? Probably. But stories aren't lies. They're how people make sense of what they don't understand. And maybe that boy was real, once. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was all of them. As the night deepens, you walk back to the riverbank. The child from earlier is now curled under a canopy of reeds, a woven blanket tucked up to their chin. You sit beside them. Their breathing is soft. Even. You don't know their name. You never will. But they're here. Real. Important. And that matters, because in the end, history may forget their names, but it never truly forgets their presence. It lingers. In stone. In stories. In you. You sit still by the water, letting the breeze comb through your hair and the stillness wrap around your limbs like a slow, sacred blanket. Somewhere behind you, a donkey brays mournfully. A fish leaps and flops back into the river with a satisfying splash. And the child beside you, still tucked under their woven cover, sighs in their sleep. What happens to children who don't fit the mold? In a world obsessed with survival, in Mesopotamia, the structure of society revolved tightly around productivity. Not unlike today, in its own exhausting way. A person's value was often calculated in terms of their output, how many bricks they could stack, how many sheep they could herd, how well they obeyed orders or taxes. There was little room for difference unless it carried a sacred stamp or a political use. But family, family. That's the secret thread that no tablet, no epic poem, no ziggurat can quite capture. What did it feel like to cradle a child who didn't respond the way others did? Who smiled too long, or not at all? Who walked later, or never? Did love rise anyway, fierce and unshakable? Or did the burden crush it before it could grow? You wander into the home of a potter. His hands are stained permanently with clay. His wife weaves palm fiber into baskets. In the corner, a boy sways gently, tapping a rhythm on the wall with his fingertips. It's soft. Hypnotic. He hums as he taps. He's maybe 8. Maybe 10. You can't quite tell. The potter glances over occasionally, says nothing, but the flicker in his eyes says everything. This is his son. He knows the song. He's heard it every day of his life. The boy's rhythm isn't just a habit. It's a language. It's the way he calms the noise in his own head. You've seen it before. Repetitive movement, self-stimulating behaviors, signs of neurodivergence that modern psychology labels and studies and sometimes still fails to understand. But here, in a mud brick home in a 4,000-year-old city, it's just Tuesday. Just part of the music of the household, and then, outside, there's shouting. You step into the courtyard. A crowd has gathered, buzzing with agitation. 2 women are arguing, furious, loud, faces flushed. One points toward a young girl hiding behind a pillar. The girl isn't speaking. Her hands flutter. Her head rocks side to side. She looks terrified. And different. She's not doing what she's supposed to. Not standing still. Not answering questions. You feel a knot in your gut. You catch fragments of the argument. Words like demon, shame, curse. The crowd shifts uneasily. This girl, who may have Down syndrome, or autism, or a blend of both, has disrupted the unspoken rhythm of the community. She has become a symbol of something people don't want to acknowledge. She is vulnerable, and then, an older man steps forward. He lifts a hand. The noise dims. His voice is calm, measured, practiced like someone used to settling quarrels. He speaks not of demons, but of difference. Of balance. Of how each village is like a woven mat, stronger because not all reeds are the same size. The girl looks up at him. Blinks. Her hands slow, the crowd disperses. Some still mutter. Some look ashamed. But the girl is safe, for now. You exhale. This moment doesn't go on a tablet. No one chisels it into stone. But it matters. It hints at a truth far older than writing. Communities are complicated. People can be cruel, but also kind. Ignorant, but also flexible. And somewhere in between those extremes is where history often hides its quietest truths. You return to the temples. Specifically, to the priests of Nippur. These were the people tasked with reading the stars, inspecting sheep livers, and interpreting every hiccup of nature as divine commentary. They had libraries, of sorts, shelves of clay tablets etched with omen lists, rituals, and interpretations that spanned centuries. Within these dusty archives is an echo of something both fascinating and frustrating, the way physical difference was spiritualized. There are tablets that mention children of strange form, who were sometimes believed to be touched by gods. Whether that was a blessing or a punishment depended on context, and on the priest doing the reading. Some may have seen children with cognitive or physical disabilities as oracles, vessels for messages too big for the average mind. Others may have seen them as threats to ritual purity. And sometimes, the same child could be seen as both, depending on the alignment of the stars, or the opinion of the powerful. You walk past a half-buried statue in the temple courtyard. Its face is worn smooth, but the hands are large and the body out of proportion. It may have represented a deity, or a human. Or both. And in that ambiguity lies the core mystery. Did they see difference as divine? Or did they simply not know what else to call it? The way language works in ancient records offers clues. For instance, there's a Sumerian word, munisnida, used to describe people who were neither male nor female, or whose identities blurred categories. It's not the same as Down syndrome, of course, but it shows that Mesopotamians recognized variation, and tried, however clumsily, to fit it into their cosmic frameworks. So if a child was born and didn't speak, or moved oddly, or seemed perpetually joyful, maybe that child was woven into myth. Maybe their name was never recorded, but their essence became part of a story, a tale of a river spirit, or a moon-blessed oracle, or a half-mortal laughter-bringer who wandered the city at dusk. You watch as a festival unfolds. Drums pound. Incense smokes. Dancers twirl. And in the middle of the celebration, a child with unusual features, short stature, a wide face, dances with such joy that even the elders smile. No one pulls them aside. No one silences them. They are part of the revelry. And for that one moment, the line between inclusion and exclusion dissolves. Was that common? Probably not. But it happened. And that's enough. Back in the quieter hours of night, you find yourself sitting by a family fire. A grandmother tells a story about her own brother, born long ago with a soft voice and a face like the moon. She remembers how he would laugh at shadows, how he'd sit for hours stacking sticks into towers and knock them down again, over and over. She says he once touched a dying lamb and it lived. Probably coincidence, she says. But she tells it with reverence anyway. You look at her eyes. You see the tenderness still flickering there. She does not forget. She does not erase. In her memory, he lives again, not as a problem, but as a presence. The fire crackles. Sparks drift upward into the dark sky, like tiny souls returning to the stars. You stretch your legs. You sigh. You think of all the children whose names were never written, but whose hands once held pebbles, or danced in dust, or hummed to themselves in quiet corners. You think of how many parents must have wondered, in silence, what would happen to their child after they were gone, and just before the wind shifts, you hear it, a faint, high giggle, like the one from the riverbank. It echoes, impossibly, through time, and you smile, because they were here. You see them now, and they still matter. You walk now with quieter steps, as if the earth beneath you is listening. The stars are wheeling slowly overhead, tracing their ancient routes across a sky untouched by artificial light. No lamp flickers. No tower blinks red in the distance. Only constellations, stories made of light, mapped by those who once looked up and needed answers. And maybe, just maybe, by those who felt out of place down here on Earth. as you step over the threshold of a crumbling shrine, something in the silence pulls you backward in time. You imagine the ceremony that may have once happened here, chants echoing from every corner, the clink of metal bowls, the rustle of ceremonial robes, the scent of cedar smoke. A young priest, maybe barely more than a boy, lights a flame with shaking hands. A child, small, silent, their head tilted curiously, watches from behind a pillar. Would they have been allowed to enter the holy circle? That's a hard question. Some religious roles in Mesopotamia were rigid. Others weren't. A child who didn't fit the mold, who moved too slowly, or spoke in riddles, or didn't speak at all, might have been considered impure. But just as easily, they could have been called God-touched. After all, the divine was always unpredictable. And what is more unpredictable than a child who sees the world entirely their own way? You think about roles in society. The Sumerians had scribes, farmers, builders, midwives, brewers, herders, and astronomers. Each role was specific, defined, and expected to contribute. What role was there for someone who couldn't write or speak clearly? Who didn't track time by the sun or count goats correctly? Maybe none. Or maybe something else. There are stories, hard to verify, but rich in possibility, of temple clowns, sacred fools, individuals whose behaviors were strange, ecstatic, or unsettling, but who were given a role in rituals because of that very difference. They might dance strangely, speak nonsense that was reinterpreted as prophecy. Their presence wasn't tolerated in spite of their difference, it was valued because of it. Historians still argue whether these figures were truly disabled in the modern sense or simply theatrical. The truth is buried beneath layers of interpretation and erosion. But the fact that such roles existed at all speaks volumes. At least in some times, in some places, difference was ritualized rather than erased. You wander through the ruins of a house partially swallowed by the earth. Its walls are bowed inward, the roof long gone. In the corner, beside a half-buried hearth, lies a doll. Clay and straw. Its eyes are gone. You pick it up and feel the weight of time inside its hollow head. You imagine a child once playing with it, perhaps a child whose movements were slower, whose speech was delayed, who made this doll their companion because words were too slippery, a mother watching from the doorway. Her face lined with worry. Not because she didn't love, but because she knew the world beyond that doorway had no patience for the slow, the soft, the different. You step into her shoes for a moment. You feel her anxiety when the child doesn't respond to their name. Her fear when they wander too close to the well. Her heartbreak when neighbors whisper. And her fury when a priest says the gods are displeased, because you realize now, even thousands of years ago, the experience of raising a child with special needs probably included all the emotions we still feel. Confusion, love, terror, protectiveness, awe. You walk to a river crossing where traders gather. One of them tells a story of a boy with eyes like polished stones who could mimic any sound he heard. Bird song, human laughter, the creak of carts. He couldn't speak in sentences, but he could echo the world perfectly. The trader chuckles. He was the best singer we ever had, he says, even if he didn't know the words. Others nod. They remember him. They speak of him not with pity, but with affection. You realize, this boy existed. Not just as a myth, but as a real person. He lived, was heard, was remembered. The warmth in your chest grows, because it's not just about survival. It's about presence. Being part of the fabric of a community, even if your thread is a different color. You think again of that limestone figurine from Nineveh. The one with broad cheeks and short limbs. Maybe it was a toy. Or maybe it was a tribute, someone carving the likeness of a beloved child who didn't grow tall, who smiled often, who stacked pebbles in spirals and giggled when they fell. Someone who mattered, and maybe, just maybe, that figurine wasn't left in a grave. Or hidden in shame. Maybe it was placed on an altar. Maybe someone lit a lamp beside it every evening, whispering a name we'll never know. You look at your hands. Imagine pressing them into wet clay. Trying to capture the curve of a nose, the line of a smile. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. The city grows quieter now. Torches burn low. The ziggurat casts a long shadow that brushes your toes. You hear footsteps behind you, slow, deliberate. You turn, and there's the child again. The one from earlier. They're awake. Barefoot. Carrying a bowl of dates. They hold it out to you with great seriousness, and you take one. It's sweet. Sticky. Full of seeds. You thank them. They nod solemnly, then sit beside you, picking at the fruit with deep concentration. You don't speak. You just exist. Together, in that moment, there is no diagnosis. No label. No need, just two people under a Mesopotamian sky, sharing fruit and silence. You and the child sit beneath the edge of dawn. The river has turned from black to ink blue, and the reeds whisper as if waking from their own dreams. Time seems to thicken, to stretch like warm honey, as the last embers of night glow against the clay walls of sleeping homes. You glance down at the child beside you. Their eyes are wide and calm, unblinking, as if they see something you cannot. Perhaps they do. Perhaps they always have. What if the way they see the world isn't a flaw, but a variation? What if the things they notice, the shimmer of water, the song of wind through cracked stone, the rhythm of footsteps, are a kind of wisdom? Not one you can measure in writing or coin, but one that makes the world feel whole. You look again at the city. It is not clean. It is not peaceful. It is loud, and full of smoke, and injustice, and uncertainty. But it is also human. And that means it is layered. It makes room, even when it doesn't mean to, for people who don't fit the mold, because no mold fits everyone. In a nearby courtyard, a man is sweeping, again. He never stops. Dust returns like a joke no one laughs at anymore. A small girl runs past him, laughing. She's chasing something invisible. Maybe joy. Maybe wind. Behind her follows a boy, his gait uneven, his voice bubbling up in bursts of song. You don't need a diagnosis. You don't need a label. You just know, this boy, too, is different, and no one stops him, no one pulls him away. No one tells him you can't. That matters. You think of how easy it is to assume the past was cruel. That ancient people knew less, cared less, loved less. But that's too simple. It's comforting, even, because it makes modern cruelty feel less shameful. But look again. Look carefully. You see in this child's smile the trace of every other smile you've ever known. The same softness. The same truth. The same light that refuses to dim just because the world is dark. You visit the workshop of a scribe. He is bent over a tablet, inscribing a hymn to the goddess Inanna. His son, short, round-faced, humming under his breath, hands him styluses. Carefully. Slowly. Each one placed like a sacred object. The father smiles. Doesn't rush. Doesn't scold. Just keeps writing. This is their rhythm. Their dance. You watch them for a long time. Later, you find a woman at a shrine pouring water over a stone. Her child stands beside her. They rock back and forth, whispering a phrase you don't understand. Over and over. A loop. A mantra. The woman doesn't hush them. She echoes the words. Together, they sing. This, too, is history, not just the wars and the kings and the trade routes, but the tiny, personal ways people loved each other in a world too rough for softness. There are no scrolls that tell you what happened to children like these. No grand monuments. But you feel it, in the wear of a temple step, in the curve of a figurine, in the echoes of lullabies that never got written down, and maybe that's the point. Maybe not everything that matters is carved in stone. You walk one last time through the city. Past the traders, the shepherds, the storytellers, the dancers. You see people. So many people. Different in age, in size, in speed. Some rush. Some wander. Some, like the child beside you, move to a rhythm all their own, and you wonder, what would history look like if it had been written by them? The ones who saw things differently. Who smiled more often. Who laughed at shadows. Who spent hours stacking stones just to feel them tumble again. Maybe it wouldn't be more accurate. But it might be more beautiful. The child tugs at your sleeve. They point to the river. The sun has breached the horizon. Everything glows. You stand. They take your hand, you walk together toward the light, and somewhere, between the hum of insects, the splash of water, the soft shuffle of sandals in dust, you hear them, not forgotten, not erased, still here, still loved, still part of the story. You squint into the brightness. Gone is the mud brick hush of Mesopotamia. Now, the air is sharp with salt, the streets hard beneath your sandals, and the architecture altogether more dramatic. Marble gleams, columns rise like petrified trees, and statues are everywhere, so many, in fact, that you begin to wonder whether anyone here has a personality not carved into stone. You adjust your toga, yes. You are, quite incongruously, wearing a toga now. The fabric itches. It drapes awkwardly. It gives you a whole new appreciation for elastic waistbands. Still, you play the part. You lean against a column in the agora, the bustling marketplace and civic heart of Athens. Or is it Rome? Time has blurred again. As it tends to do in dreams and historical scriptwriting. But the vibe is unmistakable. This is the classical world, and ideals are everything. Ideal order. Ideal virtue. Ideal bodies, which brings you to the conversation happening behind you. 3 philosophers are seated on carved benches, their robes pristine, their gestures precise. They speak with the exaggerated patience of people very proud of their own thoughts. One quotes Plato. Another counters with Aristotle. A third mentions the Stoics and nods solemnly, like he invented them. You listen, half dozing in the heat, as they discuss the perfect citizen, rational, strong, symmetrical. A body proportioned like a statue. A mind unclouded by emotion. A soul unburdened by, well, variation. They never say Down syndrome. Of course not. The concept doesn't exist for them. But the absence of something can speak just as loudly. Because in their ideal city, every man is a soldier or thinker, every woman a modest mother, and every child is expected to become one or the other. You shift on the stone bench. It's cold. Unforgiving. Much like the conversation, the first philosopher raises a question: is a child born with deficiencies still part of the polis? There's a pause. The second replies carefully. If the soul is rational, yes. If not. He lets the sentence fade like incense. The third shrugs, Greco-Roman shrugs. The universal gesture for meth through marble teeth. You walk away, but their words follow you, because what happens to people who don't fit into marble ideals? Let's rewind. In both Greece and Rome, children were seen not just as family members but as investments, future citizens, soldiers, or wives. At birth, they were inspected. Literally. A father had the legal right to expose a newborn, leave it outside to die, if the child was deformed or deemed unfit. Yes. You probably won't survive this part of history emotionally. Exposure wasn't always about cruelty. Sometimes it was desperation. Sometimes it was fear. But often, it was a brutal reflection of a society obsessed with strength, reason, and control. A crooked limb, a cleft palate, or signs of intellectual disability. That could be enough to condemn a baby to the wilderness. Yet, don't panic yet, this wasn't universal. You duck into a courtyard shaded by fig trees. A woman rocks a baby in a sling across her chest. The infant babbles, drools, and waves a chubby hand at nothing. The woman hums. Her eyes are tired but tender. No one is coming to take her child. No one is dragging them to the rocks, because despite the laws, despite the philosophers, despite the cold stone of ideals, people were still people, families loved. Mothers protected. Siblings played. And somewhere, in this sun-warmed courtyard, a child who develops slowly, who speaks late, who walks funny, who laughs at shadows, is still allowed to be. You feel relief, but also a question forming. If these children lived, what kind of life did they have? You walk through a Roman domus, an upper-class home with mosaic floors and atriums full of singing birds in gilded cages. It's beautiful, yes. But it's also performative. Everything is about appearance. The perfect family. The obedient son. The silent wife. The child who can recite Virgil by 7 and ride a horse by 8, where is the child who cannot? Maybe in the kitchen. Maybe hidden from guests. Maybe cared for by servants but not truly included. There's a fresco on the wall, a group of dancing figures in soft pastels. Among them, one child is painted smaller, with a rounded face and awkward posture. Could be perspective. Could be symbolic. But maybe, just maybe, it was a real child. The artist saw them. Froze them in pigment. Gave them a space on the wall. Even if history would not, historians still argue whether any ancient art truly depicts children with Down syndrome. The features, flattened noses, almond eyes, short fingers, are open to interpretation. An interpretation can be slippery, but the fact that we're asking, that we're wondering, that means they were here, they existed. You wander outside again. A slave brings water to a boy sitting alone near the well. The boy claps softly, rhythmically, looking at the sunlight shimmering on the surface. He makes no eye contact. He doesn't speak. But he smiles, suddenly, brilliantly. The slave smiles back. No one else notices. It's a small moment. But real. You begin to realize something about ancient Rome and Greece. They may not have had inclusive education, or disability rights, or diagnosis codes. But they had moments. Moments of care, of tolerance, of presence, and that's worth something. Still, systems matter. You enter a bathhouse. Not for hygiene, you gave up on that illusion ages ago, but because it's where people talk. A group of men are discussing a recent census. One scoffs about idiots being counted as citizens. Another laughs and says, they don't even know what day it is. You bristle, you want to say something, but you're not really here, remember? Just a drifting ghost in a toga, eavesdropping on the past. You watch a boy shuffle by. He's thin. Clumsy. Maybe 12. He drops a towel. No one helps him. He picks it up. Drops it again. Finally, a woman, an older bath attendant, hurries over and takes his hand. Guides him gently. Tells him it's okay. Her touch is light, her voice kind. There it is again. A flicker of grace. You follow them to a back room where she helps him settle into the warm water. He squeals with delight. She laughs. Her laugh is real. For a moment, all the stone ideals crumble, because here's the truth no philosopher wanted to say aloud: the ideal body doesn't exist. Never has. Never will. The human form is too varied. Too chaotic. Too beautifully unruly, and those who fall furthest from the ideal, they teach us the most about what matters. You walk past a sculptor's workshop. Inside, a boy is helping mix plaster. He's not fast. But he's careful. His tongue sticks out in concentration. The sculptor lets him work. Doesn't correct. Doesn't mock. On a shelf are practice heads. Most are symmetrical. Beautiful. But one, small, lopsided, with a soft jaw and mismatched eyes, catches your attention. It looks familiar, it looks real, maybe the sculptor made it for himself. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's someone he couldn't forget, or maybe, just maybe, it's a quiet rebellion. You step back into the sun. The marble reflects so much light you have to shield your eyes. In the glare, everything looks perfect, but you know better, you've seen the shadows, and in those shadows, the people history didn't praise. Didn't record, still moved. Still smiled. Still made a mark, not in laws, not in scrolls, but in gestures, in memory, in love. The bells toll. 1, 2, 3 slow chimes, you drift now through a century no one agrees on. The year is 1095. Or maybe 1273. Possibly 1436. Medieval Europe isn't famous for consistency, except, perhaps, in how everyone smells faintly of damp wool and boiled onions. You brush past tapestries hanging in a cold stone corridor. Flickering torches cast long shadows of lions, saints, and creatures no one ever actually saw. The air smells like mildew and old parchment. Your sandals, yes, you're still stuck in period footwear, scuff quietly on the flagstones. There's a chapel ahead, you step inside and are immediately swallowed by candlelight and incense. The ceiling arches toward heaven. Trying very hard to impress God, or at least the bishop. A monk is chanting in Latin. He may be praying for salvation. Or asking for beeswax donations. You're not entirely sure, but here's where the narrative shifts, where Down syndrome becomes not just invisible, but theologically entangled. You settle onto a creaky pew and try to make sense of this world, one that's lit by both divine hope and superstition. In the glow of stained glass, you begin to see how people who were different, physically, mentally, were interpreted less as people. And more as signs, signs of sin. Signs of holiness. Signs of imbalance in the humors. Take your pick, and because this is the Middle Ages, everyone has. You peek into a convent infirmary. A young nun bends over a girl who rocks slightly, clapping her hands with a soft thud-thud-thud. The nun does not flinch. She mirrors the rhythm. The girl stills, watching. The moment is quiet. Intimate. Then it breaks like a dropped bowl. A higher-ranking sister enters and says curtly, she mustn't disturb the silence. The girl is taken away, you don't know where, possibly to a separate room. Possibly to a place with chains. Possibly nowhere at all, just out of sight, out of narrative. Because here's the hard truth, for many in medieval Europe, disability wasn't seen as a condition to understand, but as a consequence to endure. Something caused by sin. Or demons. Or the wrath of God. Or the moon. Or your grandmother's unbaptized sneeze, and in a world where salvation was everything, difference was terrifying. You're walking again, this time past peasants tilling muddy fields with spades worn smooth. A child toddles nearby, his face round, his movements uneven. A brother drags him away gently when the priest approaches. You hear the whisper, "Don't let Father see." Because priests might say prayers, or they might say curses, it all depended on their training. And the century. And how well they'd slept. Still, you see flashes of tenderness. In one cottage, a woman cradles a child against her chest. The baby coos, wide-eyed, and tries to bite her braid. His tongue thrusts forward. His gaze doesn't always follow sound. She doesn't scold. She only rocks and sings, a lullaby older than Latin, full of nonsense syllables and rising thirds. In another village, a boy with slanted eyes and a shambling gait is seen helping a shepherd gather stragglers. He moves slowly. But he sings to the sheep. And they follow. You catch snippets of belief that complicate the harshness. In some corners of Christendom, difference is sanctified. Some believe children born with visible impairments are touched by angels, that their suffering purifies the household. Others think these children are changelings, spirits swapped in by fairies or elves as punishment or trickery. Still others blame mothers who dared to eat certain herbs or gaze too long at a full moon during pregnancy. Historians still argue whether this patchwork of belief provided comfort or only deepened fear. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe it just made surviving a single day feel like walking barefoot across a chessboard of theology and folklore. You step inside a church mid-sermon. The priest is preaching fire. Not literal fire. This time, he rails against sin made flesh, and gestures vaguely toward the back pews. People shift uncomfortably. A boy with a twisted smile hides behind his mother's shawl. Later, in the same church, a different priest kneels beside a child who cannot speak. He blesses the child's brow. The child giggles, then licks the priest's hand. The priest doesn't recoil. He laughs. This, too, is the Middle Ages, not just darkness. But there is a contradiction. Candles beside cages. Mercy beside fear. You wander a manor now. Tapestries cover drafty walls. A young noblewoman hides behind a column, watching the others dance. Her features suggest a family resemblance, but her motions are off rhythm. A nursemaid finds her and gently guides her back to the sitting room, where she is given a kitten and a slice of gingerbread. Not scolded. Not dismissed. Simply redirected. You pass by the lord of the manor discussing marriage prospects for his sons. He does not mention the daughter. In monastic records, real ones, there are scribbled notes about the simple boy who sings to the birds, or the gentle daughter who walks the gardens alone. Sometimes these individuals are kept in religious life. Not formally ordained, but housed. Federal assigned humble tasks. Loved, you want to think so. Still, not all was gentle. You find yourself in a shadowy apothecary. Shelves creak under jars labeled in fading Latin. A woman comes in, breathless, clutching her toddler. She pleads for something to fix the child's slowness. The apothecary murmurs about potions. Compresses. Maybe bloodletting. Maybe prayer. No one suggests acceptance, but acceptance sometimes grows like moss, in places no one thinks to weed. You slip behind a cart in a market square and listen as two older women gossip. One says, "You know the brewer's boy? The slow one?" The other nods. "He's better with the barrels than my own son." There's a pause, then laughter. Not cruel. Surprised. Affectionate, and you think, maybe that boy, maybe he knows more about balance and patience than anyone in a cassock. You walk along a pilgrim road. The air is thick with incense and desperation. A mother carries her teenaged son on her back. His legs dangle, weak. His face is slack, eyes distant. They've come for healing. Or for hope. Or just because no one else would take them in, they are not turned away. At the shrine, a monk brings water. Another offers bread. No miracles occur. But no one spits, either. That, in this era, counts for something. You sit at the edge of the shrine, watching pilgrims sleep on straw pallets. One boy, perhaps 13, builds tiny towers from broken tiles. His hands move with precision. He stacks carefully, knocks them down, starts again, and none notices. Sits beside him. Doesn't interrupt. Just watches. Eventually, she adds a tile. The boy accepts her offering. They build together. This is also care, not grand. Not official. But real. You follow the nun later. She carries the boy's tiny tile tower in her apron. She places it gently on a window ledge in the dormitory. She doesn't explain. She doesn't need to, someone will see it, someone will understand, someone already does. The next morning, the church bells ring again, but softer now, like an echo rather than a summons. You're awake before the village is. Mist curls around the thatched roofs and drips from every eave. Every tree branch. You wander past the sleeping market, where empty stalls still smell faintly of turnips and candle wax. A cart leans sideways in the mud, its wheel half submerged. Somewhere, a rooster tries and fails to crow with dignity. You smile. It's the first sound of the day, and it's imperfect. Beautifully so, you find yourself drawn back toward the monastery, not for ritual or penance, but for curiosity. Or maybe gratitude. The same novice from before is gathering eggs from the henhouse, whispering thanks to each hen like it's a personal transaction. He waves you toward the refectory where warm porridge and silence wait in equal measure. You eat with the monks. No one speaks. But no one stares, either. They've accepted your presence without explanation. That's its own kind of mercy. After breakfast, you're shown to the scriptorium. Not to watch, this time, but to help. A monk slides a small page toward you and places a reed pen in your hand. Outline the border, he murmurs. Like threading light. You hesitate. Then you begin. Slowly. Carefully. Your lines wobble. The ink pools. A drop blots the corner. The monk doesn't correct you. He simply nods and turns the page gently. It breathes, he says. That's good. Later, a child joins you. A girl with hair like wild straw and a gait that teeters from toe to heel. She hums as she writes. Nothing on the page matches the model she's given. But each letter is full of intention. Her tongue pokes out as she works. When she finishes, she beams. You beam back. The monk takes her page and places it in a stack with the others. No separation. No lesser pile. Just added, that afternoon, you visit the infirmary again. A boy sleeps with one hand fisted around a string of prayer beads. The sister tells you he's been sick for days, but he always smiles when the bells ring. He loves rhythm, she says. Even if it wakes him. You sit beside his cot and wait for the next bell. When it chimes, his eyes flutter open. He doesn't smile today. But he reaches for your sleeve. That's enough. In the hallway, a tapestry flutters where the wind sneaks through the window gaps. It shows a saint, unknown, unnamed, holding a lamb with 3 eyes. You ask about it. A passing monk shrugs. Some say it's a warning. Some say it's a miracle. He smiles. I think it's just a lamb. You both laugh, softly. The kind of laugh that leaves room for not knowing. You spend the evening watching the children work in the garden again. One boy is fixated on lining up pebbles by color. A girl corrects him. He doesn't respond, but after she leaves, he starts again, his own order. His own pattern. Later, the gardener thanks him for keeping the birds away. They hate straight lines, he jokes. The boy doesn't laugh, but he does place the last pebble with exaggerated care. As the sun dips low, you return to the chapel. You light a candle for no one in particular. Or maybe for everyone. The flicker feels personal. Across the room, a sister plays a tune on a dulcimer. Not part of any service. Not even a song you recognize. It's off-key in places. The strings buzz when she presses too hard. But it weaves through the air like a soft thread, pulling the silence into shape, before you leave. You glance at the window where the tile tower still sits. It's smaller now. Some pieces have toppled. But someone has added a feather. And a daisy. A tiny shrine to imperfection. A cathedral built from scraps. You walk the long road out of town as twilight settles in. Along the path, you see signs that weren't there before, carvings in tree trunks, ribbons tied to fence posts, little bundles of dried herbs left at the roots of ancient oaks. Not spells. Not curses. Just messages. From those who see the world a little differently. From those who were once called broken and are now simply. Here, at the edge of the forest, you stop. A child stands there, watching you. Hair tangled, cloak too big. Eyes steady. He doesn't speak. Doesn't need to. He holds out a small object, a wooden disc with a spiral carved into it. The same spiral you saw days ago, scratched into dust beside the well. You take it. He nods once, then disappears into the trees like mist folding into mist. You hold the disc tight in your palm. It's not polished. The carving is uneven. But your thumb fits into the groove perfectly, and that, maybe, is the point. The fire's embers glow like fallen stars. You step out of the rough-spun corridors of the priory into a courtyard lit by moonlight and nervous hope. The night smells of herbs drying on ropes strung between beams, lavender, rosemary, bundles of thyme. Somewhere, a nun hums a hymn you can't quite place, but it feels like comfort stitched into the darkness. Here, in the pale light, you see a boy sitting on the stone ledge of a garden well. He draws spirals in the dust with a stick and whistles an uncertain melody. A mosaic of broken shells and petals sparkles at his feet, someone's quiet offering to whatever's listening above. You crouch beside him. He doesn't flinch, he hums again. You hum along. Just a note. A breath, they match. It's a lullaby older than church walls, a human song born of shared quiet. You want to ask his name. But words feel heavy. You settle for a smile. And the boy smiles back, a moment of peace. A moment of equality. In the morning, you see him helping the gardener. Not with heavy work, but with gentle tasks, watering seedlings, brushing moss from statues, collecting fallen petals. The gardener thanks him. He murmurs back with a grin. They both know, the sun rises higher. The shadows shorten. You walk through a tapestry-lined hallway into the infirmary. A young sister tends to a small bed. At its foot, a book is open, an illustrated life of a saint known for caring for the disabled. You peek, the saint has a halo, but no ideal features. Just warm eyes and a welcoming smile. Nearby, a scribe writes in the margins, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be healed themselves." You wonder who wrote that. A monk? A nun? An outsider? Someone who mattered. You sit for a while in that quiet space. It smells of medicine and holiness. You watch a healer mix a poultice and lay it gently on a boy with sloping shoulders. The boy doesn't cry. He touches the healer's sleeve. She holds his hand for a moment. You realize something. In medieval Europe, faith could be both a cage and a haven. It enlisted divine authority to marginalize, to exclude, to burn. But it also provided refuge, care, ritual that said, "You are seen." You step outside again. The castle looms behind, walls high. A child with Down syndrome might not inherit, might never have a place at the round table. But they had a place, at the foot of a cross. Under a mother's arm. Beside a sister still whispering prayers well after everyone else has gone asleep. You walk the path to the village again, past night watchmen and the blacksmith's forge, embers cracking like distant thunder. You think of all the medieval minds who wrestled with this question: can the soul of someone so different still reach salvation? Some answered no. Others said yes, emphatically. That within spiritual deviation lay spiritual purity. They quoted scripture, "The meek shall inherit the earth." They looked at crooked bodies and saw crooked truth. You stop before a weather-worn crucifix. Its arms are uneven. The wood is cracked. But the figure of Christ is perfect, not because it's ideal, but because he is present. An imperfect presence is still grace. You sit in the chapel for the last time, taking in the silence. Candles drip. The incense stick curls down like a question mark. A choir of night insects begins the evening's lullaby. You close your eyes. In that hush, you feel the weight of centuries, both harsh and gentle. Fold around you, you sense parents who prayed for understanding. Monks who wrote prayers for nameless children. Nuns who cradled babies whose only sin was existence, and you sense something else, that even in the darkest theological shadows, compassion didn't vanish. It flickered. It survived, and sometimes, that flicker was enough. You wake again, not quite in mourning, not quite in memory. The stone beneath you is cool. The chapel's candle has finally sputtered out, leaving only the faintest curl of smoke rising toward a vaulted ceiling carved with stars. You let your fingers trace the grooves in the stone floor, worn by centuries of knees, of grief, of small, aching hope. Outside, dew has settled across the village. The air smells green, wet earth, trampled herbs, the faint bite of chimney smoke. The streets are quiet but not empty. In the market square, a man in a patched cloak sweeps last night's leaves into the drain with a broom made of bramble twigs. You nod. He nods back. You wonder if his silence is by choice or by nature. Either way, it feels whole. A woman passes you carrying a bundle of bread wrapped in linen. She stops at the door of the apothecary and knocks gently. When no one answers, she leaves the bread on the step. You watch her walk away, then see a hand, small, crooked, careful, reach through the door crack and pull it inside. A boy's hand, maybe. You can't tell. That's the thing about some lives, they're half seen on purpose. You walk a little farther, to the river that borders the village. A shepherd boy sits on a rock, humming. His eyes are crossed slightly, but his gaze is fixed on the current. Sheep gather loosely behind him, more out of comfort than obedience. He tosses small stones into the water, each one swallowed without a splash. When he notices you, he pats the stone beside him. You sit. You both say nothing, and that, somehow, is the right thing. A bell chimes in the distance. Matins. The village begins to stretch into wakefulness. Behind closed doors, families rise. Some cook. Some pray. Some worry. In one home, you see a mother gently combing her daughter's hair. The child rocks a little, rhythmically, eyes unfocused. The mother hums, not to calm her daughter, but to anchor herself. They are tethered like that, through sound, through repetition, through love's tired determination. Back at the priory, the children gather in the courtyard for morning tasks. A boy waters the same patch of soil 3 times. No one stops him. A girl with a twisted foot sorts colored beads into a bowl with deliberate slowness. A monk adjusts the angle of the sun dial, not for accuracy, but because the children like watching the shadow move. Inside, one of the sisters prepares ink. She opens a new vial of crushed berries and mixes them with ash to make a purple hue. It's for the margins, she says. Where the saints dance. You watch her pass the ink to a novice with trembling hands. The novice smiles and sets to work. The saints she paints are crooked. And lovely. You find your way back into the scriptorium. Where pages dry on strings like laundry. Illuminated letters gleam, imperfect gold, slightly smudged. But the meaning is there. Every curl, every blot, a record of someone's careful attention. A chronicle not of war or kings, but of humanity's smaller devotions. In a corner, a scroll lies half-finished. The text stops mid-sentence. You can't read the script, but somehow you know what it says. And the boy saw the stars, and he did not look away. You leave the priory for the last time with that line in your head. On the edge of the village, you pass a makeshift shrine, a circle of river stones, wildflowers, and wax stubs pressed into the ground. A small wooden plaque leans against the base. It reads, "For those who were returned to the forest." And for those who weren't. There's a story in that, but it isn't yours to tell. The road ahead curls between fields and tree lines. You pass a cart loaded with hay and a girl curled in the back, hands fluttering like wings as she watches the sky. The driver doesn't rush. Doesn't scold. He hums an off-key tune and lets the horse choose the pace. You walk behind them, content to follow for a while. Later, you find a grove where wild mushrooms grow in spirals. Children have strung feathers from the branches with bits of string. One feather turns gently in the breeze, its quill caught in the bark like it's writing a story into the tree itself. You lie beneath it and listen to the wind. You think of all the children who lived in centuries that feared them. Who were named wrong. Who were measured by scales they could never fit. Who were shunned, then pitied, then ignored. And you wonder, not what they would have become, but what they already were, unrepeatable, not mistakes to be fixed, but songs in unfamiliar keys. The clouds shift, and a shaft of sunlight breaks through, scattering light across your chest. You breathe it in. You don't move. The world tilts and creaks and turns around you. And for a moment, the spiral the boy traced in the dust feels complete. This part of the story doesn't end, it changes shape. You step through an embossed bronze doorway, into a world of polished lacquer and silent elegance. The halls are long, each one echoing with the gentle scrape of your slippers on redwood floors. The air smells of camphor, sandalwood, and the faintest trace of jasmine from a vase somewhere beyond a curved screen. You run your fingers, quietly, over lacquered panels carved with dragons, phoenixes, and scholars lost in contemplation. Everywhere you look, luxury and precision meet. The Ming Dynasty court favored order above all else, rigid hierarchies, ceremonial dress, precise protocol for every gesture. And every record is written down. You can spend a lifetime reading the archives, officials' rankings. Grain quotas, tribute lists, court ceremonies, punishments for officials who smiled at the emperor's horse the wrong way. But there's silence here, too. No sections in court annals lament children who moved slowly. No edicts about deformity. No guidelines for caring for infants who didn't speak or stand at the expected time. They simply aren't mentioned. You glide past a servant carrying a silver tray of tea. His face is motionless. You sip. It's warm and bittersweet. You swallow hard, thinking of all the people who would have written about prestige, not tiny hands or slow walkers. You turn a corner into a grand hall. An official ceremony is underway. Dozens of officials kneel in perfect rows. They bow in unison. They whisper prayers. Another servant plays a zither so soft it barely tickles the air. At the far end of the hall sits the emperor. He is silent. Regal. Opaque. The ceremony continues. You notice a small child, maybe 5, trailing behind a nanny in the back corridor. The nanny pauses. Checks the child's feet. The child winces. His steps are slow. He lags. She sighs and lifts him onto her hip. The child stays hidden, but he's real. In the court records, his name would never appear. He's not important enough for posterity. Not if you're bent or different. You look at the lacquered walls. They shine. They reflect the image of another child, you. Wearing slippers that don't fit. Trying not to rock the floors with your awkward gait, because that's the line here. Between being seen and being recorded, you drift into a side room. It's less grand. Hardwood screens separate jerking lanterns from piles of rolled documents. A clerk sits cross-legged, copying texts. He pauses when you enter. Nods politely. Keeps writing. You peer at his work. Bureaucratic detail. Grain shipments. Land surveys. Rankings of officials. Every time you think you'll see a mention of children outside the norm. Nothing, you see more lacquer. More scrolls, more calm. And silence, you imagine another scroll, unwritten. One that would have chronicled families coping with a child who couldn't read Chinese characters yet, who watched shadows dance on courtyard walls but didn't speak, who laughed more than they cried, who needed a slower pace. It never gets chronicled, but it still existed. Beyond the court, in small huts behind the palace walls, a mother whispers lullabies in a dialect not recorded in annals. A father trains his son in calligraphy, but lets the shapes run free, because the child presses too hard, carving ink onto paper. They still let him have a brush. He watches. He learns. He lives. Minutes later you find yourself in the imperial garden. Bamboo stalks quiver in the breeze. Carp slip beneath jade bridges. A court painter is staging a portrait of a young prince. The painter is meticulous. Mixing pigments. Blowing dust away. The prince is positioned to look perfect. You notice something else, a child hiding behind a pillar, close enough to peek, but always staying out of sight. A younger sibling, maybe. You think of Down syndrome, broad smile, almond eyes, short stature. You'll never know, but there they are. Alive. That absence in the records, where difference goes unrecorded, is sometimes louder than any edict. You wander past rooms for eunuchs, scholar officials, concubines. Every chamber is planned. Every bed is placed perfectly. No room for mess. No invitation for chaos, except humanity. Later, in the night, you find yourself seated at a low desk, writing your own account of the court. You write about protocol. Write about lacquer. Then you pause. You begin to write differently, about the nanny and her slow-stepping ward. About the painter and the hiding child. About your own worn slippers echoing in redwood halls. You finish and leave the scroll on a scriptorium table. You whisper, "Remember this." Before you slip away, because that's how history changes, a single line, scribbled softly among the official chapters, refusing to stay silent. The dawn barely peeks over the tiled roofs when you find yourself wandering through the quiet corridors of the Forbidden City. The morning air is crisp with a hint of plum blossom and dew. You pause beneath an ancient pine, watching as a court eunuch meticulously arranges a display of porcelain vases, each a masterpiece of delicate craftsmanship and symbolic meaning. These vases tell stories of power, longevity, and celestial favor. They stand as immortal witnesses to the grandeur of the Ming dynasty, yet, like the official archives, they say nothing about the vulnerable. The unseen children who dwelled within the palace walls or the surrounding villages. You continue your walk and enter the imperial library, a labyrinth of scrolls and bound books. The librarian, a stooped old man with thick spectacles, nods at you but says nothing. His eyes, however, hold a secret sadness. You glimpse texts detailing ceremonies, laws, and dynastic histories, but no mention of children who struggled to walk or speak. You imagine the whispered lullabies of mothers in hidden chambers, the cautious smiles of caretakers who learn to read silent cues, and the quiet resilience of children whose faces never graced the pages of history. You move to the gardens, where lotus flowers float serenely on still ponds. Here, the ordinary moments unfold away from the glare of imperial scrutiny. A boy with an affectionate smile helping to tend the bamboo groves, a girl tracing calligraphy with uncertain fingers, a mother watching her child with eyes full of quiet love and worry. The gaps in the record suggest a world where difference was erased from the narrative, where normal was the only version worth recording. Yet beneath the lacquer and silk, life pulsed with subtle defiance. You find a small pavilion adorned with faded murals depicting scholars and immortals. Sitting quietly, you sense the invisible threads connecting past and present, official and personal, recorded and forgotten. In that silence, you hear a deeper history, not written by scribes, but lived by those who loved, cared, and endured. and as you step back into the sunlight filtering through carved lattice windows, you carry with you a new understanding. History's greatest omissions sometimes tell us the most. The sun climbs higher, golden light slanting through the gates as a breeze catches a set of silk banners and makes them tremble like nervous breath. You move down a corridor flanked by stone lions and blooming plum trees. Each step brings you deeper into the layers of unspoken truth. In the distance, bells chime, not for prayer or ceremony, but to mark the hour when shadows begin to soften and courtly precision yields briefly to domestic murmurs. A maid passes, balancing a tray of rice congee and salted vegetables. You follow her from a distance, your steps quiet, your eyes drawn to the door she enters. It's a side chamber, modest compared to the throne rooms and audience halls. Inside, a boy sits propped with cushions, legs curled beneath him like folded wings. His eyes are wide, one hand tapping gently against his knee in a steady rhythm. The maid doesn't speak to him. She sets down the tray and offers a nod, then quietly adjusts his blanket before slipping out. He eats slowly. You watch through a lattice screen, invisible but present. He is not erased. Not entirely. But his presence is not commemorated, either. He is cared for, fed, protected, but not named. Not celebrated. You wonder what stories he might tell, if someone asked. In a tucked-away courtyard, elderly attendants sweep fallen leaves into quiet piles. One of them hums softly, a folk tune that predates even the court's oldest surviving records. You sit nearby, letting the tune settle over you like a second layer of breath. Another attendant joins him, this one younger, his right arm twisted at the elbow. He sweeps with his left hand only, slower but deliberate. They don't speak of it. The older one simply slows his own pace to match. No judgment. No instructions. Just synchrony. As afternoon deepens, you step into a side building where the Empress once practiced poetry and ink painting. The walls are covered in floral motifs and poetic couplets. A scroll lies open on a side table, an unfinished poem. The brush strokes falter halfway through the second line, the ink fading like someone hesitated, or left abruptly. You add a line of your own. Not elegant, not courtly. Just honest. A sentence about the boy in the side room, about his silent rhythm, about the courage of simply being present in a world that erases so easily. You place the brush down carefully, as though the table might remember your hands. Later, in a narrow passage behind the kitchens, you hear laughter. Not the loud, boisterous laughter of courtiers or generals. It's softer. Irregular. Curious. Two children, one with a limp, the other with a stammer, are sharing dried fruit, telling each other ghost stories in fragments and shrugs. A cook yells for them to be gone, but not harshly. There's something protective in his scolding, like someone who knows how fragile welcome can be in a world that only measures strength. At dusk, the court assembles once more. Lanterns glow like captive moons. Perfumed sleeves brush against polished floors. Music begins again, measured, exact, ceremonial. You remain at the edge, just outside the arc of official history. You watch the procession of officials bowing, the scribes recording each moment in ink that will last longer than memory. But no one records the cook's gentleness. Or the unfinished poem, or the boy whose legs won't let him run but whose mind follows the clouds with startling speed. You walk one last time through the hall of supreme harmony. The name rings differently now. Not grandeur. Not perfection. But a longing, perhaps even an admission, that harmony isn't about sameness. It's about what survives in the gaps. As the final lanterns are doused, the corridors grow cool again. You trace your steps back to the library. The old librarian is asleep now, his head resting on an open scroll. You place a folded note beside him. On it, not a treatise or edict. Just a list of names you made up, children who never made the records but should have. May who stammered when excited. Jean who could memorize bird calls. Shue who painted with both hands. You leave it there, knowing he might throw it away. Or he might read it. Or he might simply dream of it, the way some stories slip past words and into sleep. You exit the palace through the moon gate, its circular frame catching the last of the twilight. Outside, a woman rocks a child in a basket sling, singing a lullaby in a tone too soft for officials to hear. A boy gathers dropped peaches from a vendor's cart, offering the ripest one to a girl who claps twice and beams. You clutch your candle like a lifeline as you creep down the warped floorboards of a creaking hallway, the wax melting too fast for comfort. Outside, the wind howls across the moor, pressing against wooden shutters with the weight of rumor and hysteria. Every footstep echoes like a guilty thought. The year is 1623, or 1571, or 1684, it doesn't really matter. Somewhere in early modern Europe, you're in the thick of it. And in this world, explanations for the unexplainable come draped in soot, scripture, and suspicion. You duck beneath a crooked beam and enter a darkened chamber lit only by firelight. Smoke coils like gossip, thick in the rafters. A small crowd has gathered. Hunched around a crude cradle where a child lies sleeping, or not sleeping, exactly. Twitching. Grunting. Rolling eyes that refuse to fix on a face. You glance at the midwife, who draws a breath so sharp you swear it could slice bread. Changeling, she mutters. Just loud enough to be heard. Just quiet enough to pretend she didn't say it, it's a word that carries centuries of freight. To the villagers, it explains everything, the child's difference, the mother's shame, the father's silence. And in this pre-enlightenment landscape, few diagnoses are more dangerous. You crouch beside the fire, catching your breath as the conversation stirs. An old man with trembling hands fumbles with a rosary. They're not right in the head, those kinds, he whispers. Taken by the fair folk, or switched at birth, you'll see. Someone else nods solemnly, staring at the child. Left us a devil child. Mark me. The real one's off dancing in the hill with the elves. You blink, unsure if you should laugh, cry, or douse yourself in holy water. Welcome to early modern Europe, where fairies explain neurological disorders, and which trials are about to peak like they've just sold out a Colosseum tour. You step outside into the night air. It smells like wet thatch, dung, and collective paranoia. Behind you, the village continues to murmur, feeding on its own unease like rats on grain. A rooster crows early, bad omen. A dog howls, worse omen. A baby cries, and suddenly everyone's a theologian. Let's be honest, no one here has the vocabulary for autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, or intellectual disability. Instead, they reach for what they know, changelings. These beings are not quite human, not quite otherworldly, just different enough to scare you. A child who doesn't cry, doesn't nurse, doesn't look into your eyes. Switched by fairies. A child who shrieks and thrashes. The devil's seed. A child who speaks late, if ever. Cursed, possessed, perhaps even soulless. Historians still argue whether belief in changelings was primarily rooted in folklore, theology, or the grim economics of survival. Some think it was a way to explain birth defects or developmental differences in a pre-scientific world. Others say it was a convenient excuse to reject or remove a child who strained the family's already precarious resources. Still others suggest a kind of psychological coping, a way to grieve the child one expected while clinging to the hope that the real one was still out there somewhere, safe among fae. Whatever the reason, the result was often brutal. You follow a crooked footpath out of the village, candlelight flickering like a nervous heartbeat. Ahead lies a thatched hut, barely more than sticks and sod, but you hear chanting inside. A local wise woman is burning juniper and muttering incantations. Her fingers are stained with herbs in desperation. She's been called here before. Sometimes to bless. Sometimes to exorcise. Sometimes to do the unspeakable, tonight, she dips her fingers in ash and touches the child's forehead. "Leave this house, foul spirit," she croaks. "Return to the dark from whence you came." You watch as she waves the incense and the mother sobs. The father won't look up. The child writhes. For a moment, you imagine time folding in on itself, a future therapist watching this scene like a horror film in slow motion. These rituals were common. Some were symbolic. Others are more violent. In some regions of Germany and Scandinavia, so-called changelings were subjected to trial by ordeal, placed on a hot iron shovel and held over fire. The idea was simple: either the heat would drive the fairy away and force the real child's return, or, well, either way, the parents got an answer, and if the child died, that, too, was interpreted as proof. Proof that the creature had no soul. That the swap had been real. That justice had been served. You press a hand to your mouth, bile rising. How did they sleep at night? You glance at your candle. The wax drips silently onto your fingers. Maybe they didn't. You retreat into the folds of your cloak as the wind picks up, stirring the night into something restless. A creaking sign above a tavern door swings wildly, its iron hinges groaning like a soul in purgatory. You slip inside, hoping for warmth, or at least distraction, but the atmosphere inside is thick with the same suspicion that saturates the village air like chimney soot. Inside, over tankards of ale and oil lamp tables, men speak not of crops or coin but of curses. A merchant recounts how his cousin's boy was fine, walking by 1 year old, talking by 2, and then suddenly lost all words and wit after a strange fog rolled into the valley. "They took the real one," he mutters. "Left us with a mute spectre." Another swears that his niece laughed backward, whatever that means, and now hasn't aged in years. "Something unnatural," he says, "they're keeping her soul in the old well behind the church. Mark me." You rub your temples, feeling your own thoughts swirl like muddy cider. In these stories, every deviation from the norm becomes a narrative. Every tick, tremor, delay, or silence is a crack through which the supernatural creeps. They don't have MRI machines, no DSM-5, no early intervention programs. What they have are fire, prayer, and suspicion, and once suspicion catches, it spreads like hay in a dry field. It isn't always the child who suffers most. Sometimes it's the mother. You find her alone in a narrow chamber at the back of her cottage, rocking slowly, her arms wrapped around nothing. Her eyes are red but dry, exhausted from tears. Her child, her real child, she insists, is gone. Stolen. Replaced. The priest said it was divine punishment. The midwife said it was her own fault for wandering near standing stones while pregnant. Her husband stopped speaking to her entirely. You kneel beside her. There is nothing to say. You both sit in silence, listening to the house settle and the wind push against the door like it's testing your resolve. Women in her position were often accused of witchcraft. Too much love for a devil child. Clearly unnatural. Too much detachment. Suspicious. Did she nurse him wrong? Did she speak strange lullabies? Was she barren for years and then suddenly pregnant after walking through the woods alone? These are the questions that build gallows. Historians still argue whether witch trials were ever really about magic. Or if they were about power. Or fear. Or convenience. But what's obvious to you, crouching there beside her, is that whatever else they were personal. Brutally personal, and as a woman in early modern Europe, there were few things more dangerous than being considered unknowable. The next morning, you follow the trail of smoke rising from the village edge to the cottage of a midwife. Her hands, lined and calloused, know both miracles and mourning. She greets you with a tired nod and a kettle of nettle tea. Inside, hanging from the rafters, are bundles of dried lavender, garlic, and bundles of herbs you can't name. A wooden cradle sits by the hearth. Empty, She explains that sometimes babies are born incomplete. Sometimes too silent. Sometimes with too many thumbs or none at all. There are no rules, she says, only stories. Once, I delivered a child who never blinked, she tells you, eyes gazing into the fire. It stared straight at the midday sun. Didn't cry. Didn't flinch. And you know what the father did? You shake your head, he took it out into the woods that night, she says. Left it under an oak tree. Said if it were human, the wolves wouldn't touch it. If not, well, it wouldn't be missed. You want to vomit. Instead, you sip your tea. It tastes bitter, not every story ends in abandonment. Some mothers hid their children's differences, raising them in secret or under layers of ritual. Some were smuggled into monasteries, where compassion sometimes outweighed condemnation. Others were baptized again and again, in rivers and wells, in desperate hope of purging whatever wrong had befallen them. Not all changelings were rejected. Some became legends. In a dusty tome the midwife lets you read, there's a story of a child with limp limbs and moon eyes who could see the future. A saint, maybe. Or just a child whose survival meant someone dared to love them anyway. Outside, the wind still whispers. You step back into it, the sky bruised with storm. The candle you carry flickers, but doesn't go out. You trail a procession of monks through the fog, their footsteps muffled by layers of damp moss and humility. Their brown robes swing like heavy curtains in a theater of silence, and you match their pace, drawn by the promise of something different. Not kinder, exactly. But different. More structured. The monastery looms ahead, Romanesque and crumbling, like a fortress built out of prayer and mildew. Inside, theology has teeth, but sometimes, just sometimes, it leaves room for mercy. You slip through a side archway where the smell of beeswax, ink, and boiled oats lingers. A novice ushers you through a narrow stone corridor, gesturing silently toward a cloister where a group of children kneel at wooden desks. Some are reciting Latin with awkward precision. Others just sway back and forth, murmuring nonsense syllables or staring at sunbeams on the wall. A monk with a face like a collapsed bellows pats one child gently on the shoulder, correcting a pronunciation that's closer to song than scripture. You ask him, quietly, what this place is. He glances toward the altar. God's garden, he says, with a weary half-smile. And some of his plants grow in curious shapes. Here, difference isn't erased. It's named. Labeled. Sorted into boxes. Idiotia, for those who don't speak. Fatuous, for those who smile too often. Muta, for the silent ones. Words that suit the church's need for classification. Medieval medicine doesn't know your chromosomes or brain chemistry. But it does love a label. Still, the labels are sometimes cloaks, protective ones. Monasteries like this occasionally served as refuges. A family could send a child here instead of hiding them under floorboards or drowning them in folklore. The child might live out a quiet life copying manuscripts, tending a garden, or just existing. That, in this era, is practically a happy ending. Of course, it wasn't all parchment and peace. She tells you about the night she knew. The way her baby's laughter changed. How his eyes no longer followed her. How his skin grew cold no matter how many blankets she wrapped him in. They said to beat it, she says flatly. The changeling. Beat it until it leaves and the fae return the real one. You nod. You've heard this before. In Irish and Scottish traditions, it was called fairyscaping. The logic, if you can call it that, was clear: hurt the changeling, and the fairies would take it back. Sometimes, they did. Usually because the child died, sometimes the fairies didn't. And the child lived. You look around the small room. A bundle of herbs tied above the doorway. A small stone idol tucked behind the firewood. A pagan leftover. A Bible on the shelf, untouched. This house is a battleground between faiths, none of which fully explain what this woman feels, or lost. You step outside as night fully claims the sky. Stars peer down through cracks in the clouds like curious saints. In the distance, another cottage door slams. You hear a child cry. And another silence it. The wind carries the sound of prayers, but you're not sure whose side they're on anymore. You press onward, candles still burning, you awaken to church bells. Not one tower, but many, each chime overlapping like anxious thoughts. You must have dozed off beside a shrine, its candle stub now a puddle of wax on your cloak. The stone Madonna beside you looks down with a chipped, indifferent gaze. And maybe it's the fatigue, or the cold, but for a moment you wonder, if statues really weep, who are they crying for? You rise stiffly, brush dust from your sleeves, and move toward the town square where a crowd is gathering. There's a boy at the center. No more than 10. Standing alone, his hands flutter at his sides like restless birds. His eyes dart from person to person, but never connect. Someone has drawn chalk circles around his feet, some ritual protection, or perhaps a sign he's been marked. He doesn't speak. Not that you can hear. And no one dares approach him. A woman cries, he's seen the witches fly. Look at his eyes, clouded with spellcraft. Another shouts, he dances with no tune, he must be possessed. You step forward, but a hand grabs your sleeve. An old man shakes his head. You don't want their madness jumping into you, he whispers, because in this world, madness is catching. It spreads in ideas, glances, rumors. And once caught, there is no cure. The boy begins to hum, a disjointed melody with no rhythm. Children stare. Parents look away. Someone crosses themselves. You try to hold your breath. Across Europe, thousands of such children lived shadow lives. Not always named changelings, but treated as such. Hidden away, bound by shame or curiosity or a desperate hope for return to normalcy. In some towns, they were paraded before inquisitors. Made to walk straight lines. Recite catechisms. Touch crucifixes without flinching. In others, they were taken to wells, blessed springs said to cleanse unnatural spirits. There, they were dunked again and again, as if baptism could overwrite biology. You read one account of a girl who didn't speak until age 9. When she finally whispered a single word, bread, the priest declared it a miracle. She became a local legend. But had she always understood, only unable to respond? Or had her silence been her only defense? Another case in Saxony, a boy with twisted limbs and an unblinking stare was believed to be half angel, half demon. His family alternated between fasting on his behalf and locking him in a cellar during storms. Even royalty wasn't immune. Rumors swirled about noble families sending their damaged heirs to monasteries or distant estates, replacing them with healthier cousins. After all, bloodlines needed to be clean, visibly divine. You find yourself in a small chapel now, drawn by the flicker of votive candles. The walls are covered with wooden carvings, some saints, some creatures you don't recognize. A woman kneels beside a small altar, her hands trembling as she places a bundle on the stone. It's a rag doll. Carefully sewn. Crude, but clearly made with love, an offering, she whispers. To get her back. You sit beside her in silence. She tells you about her daughter, taken in the night. The one who came back wasn't hers. The child looked the same, but colder. Hungrier. Didn't laugh. Didn't sing. She doesn't blink when the sun's in her eyes, the woman says. And she bites the dog. You nod. You've heard this before. Only now, you realize how often the differences are described not just physically, but socially. It's not just about speech or movement. It's about whether the child responds to love. That's what frightens people most. Not the odd limb or the delayed word. But the mirror that doesn't smile back. In Wales, they said changelings hated iron. So parents left scissors in their cradles. In Brittany, they left warm milk by doorways to appease the fairies. If the milk went untouched, the child must be one of them. In parts of Italy, you find records of counter-switchings, rituals designed to swap the changeling back for the real child. These ranged from burning the baby's hair to swinging it over a fire while chanting specific psalms backward. One German account describes a father leaving his son in a pigsty for 3 nights. Believing that if the changeling got cold enough, he'd flee, and the human child would reappear in his place, smiling and warm in the morning. Hey, he didn't. These stories aren't just cruel, they're consistent. They point to something deeper, a society so terrified of the unexplained that it would rather hurt than accept. That would rather invent monsters than face mystery, and yet, there were always exceptions. In one Alpine village, you read about a man named Elias, born with a curved spine and slow gait. His parents were urged to test him. Instead, they hid him. Taught him to weave baskets. And one day, a traveling noble bought one of Elias's baskets and brought it to court, marveling at its strength and pattern. Elias was summoned, shy and slow, into the halls of power, and eventually hired as a royal craftsman. His story became a parable for patience. And then there's the wild girl of Rouen, a child found in the woods, filthy and feral, who communicated only in gestures. Believed to be a fey child, she was brought to a convent where the nuns taught her to read, paint, and garden. She never spoke. But her paintings hung in the church vestibule for decades. She signed them all with a crooked X. You light a candle in the chapel before you leave, one for the children labeled changelings, one for the mothers who knew better, and one for all the kindnesses lost in fear. You tiptoe across a parlor floor that smells faintly of lavender water and soot. Everything is upholstered. The curtains, the chairs, the moral rigidity. Even the clock seemed padded, ticking softly as if too much enthusiasm might cause a scandal. You've arrived in the Victorian era, the century of trains and corsets, of queen and empire, and of very strong opinions about what shouldn't be spoken aloud, especially about people like you. Your shoes click across marble tiles in a charity hospital lobby, and you're immediately scolded by a man in a gray waistcoat. Ladies do not gallop indoors. You smile politely. You are not a lady. Nor a gentleman. Nor something easily labeled on one of their forms. You're just here to see how the century sorted out people who didn't quite fit. Spoiler, it hid them, but it did so very politely. You're ushered into what's called a home for the feeble-minded. The walls are mint green, a fashionable shade meant to calm the nerves. Gaslight flickers above your head, casting shadows that shift with every draft. The corridors smell like boiled cabbage and coal smoke. A woman in crisp muslin greets you. She's not a nurse, too elegant. Not a doctor, too female. She calls herself the matron, and she speaks with clipped vowels and limitless certainty. They're simple souls, she says of her charges. Delicate. Easily overwhelmed. You peer into a room. Children sit at tiny desks, carefully tracing the alphabet. One girl just scribbles loops. A boy rocks quietly. Another hums to himself, staring out the window. They're doing splendidly, the matron coos. Some even so. You ask where they go after this. Her expression freezes. Go. Why, nowhere. Most remain here until their natural conclusion. You understand. This is not a school. It's a storage room with a prettier name. Welcome to the polite erasure of the Victorian mind. It's not that they didn't notice the disability. It's that they defined it, and then boxed it up in velvet terms. Terms like morally defective, backward, and the ever-popular imbecilic. There were categories: idiot, imbecile, moron. These weren't insults yet. They were medical. An idiot was someone with a mental age below 3. An imbecile could learn simple tasks. A moron might even pass for normal in polite society if they didn't speak too much. Your eyebrows raise. You can't help it, one doctor notes, in a journal you're not supposed to be reading, that the Mongolian type of idiocy is the most benign. You clench your teeth. This, of course, is one of the earliest documented descriptions of Down syndrome. But they don't call it that yet, they call it Mongolism, a term now rightly discarded, but at the time, they believed the facial features of individuals with Down syndrome resembled those of Asian ancestry. Racial pseudoscience wrapped inside clinical language. The Victorians were good at that. You find a file room. Neatly labeled folders stretch the length of the wall, female idiots, age 5 to 10. Lunatic cases, domestic. Criminally defective boys. You pull one at random. Inside, a photograph, sepia-toned, of a child in a stiff collar, eyes vacant. Attached, a note. Prone to sudden outbursts. Mute. Teeth poor. No response to catechism. Another folder lists a girl as cheerful. Fond of skipping, unable to master sums, but excellent at singing. You wonder if she's still here, singing in a locked room. It hits you, this era doesn't fear difference. It catalogs it, with exceptional neatness. Outside, a cab clatters by, hooves echoing off the gaslight alley. You follow the sound to a charity school across town. Here, the tone is different. Livelier. Poor children crowd into long benches, slates in hand. The teacher, a brisk man with a cane and a cough, paces between them like a commander. He doesn't yell. He speaks clearly, constantly. You spot one girl in the back row who doesn't write anything. Another whispers to himself about railway schedules. A third stares at you without blinking. You nod to him. He nods back. In some way, you think, he knows you. Back outside, you sit beneath a wrought iron lamp post, watching the smoke rise from chimneys in rows. London is a machine. It makes fog and class hierarchy and bad poetry. But it also makes categories. And categories, in this era, are everything. You glance down at your notebook. You've written, Victorians sorted people like receipts. Some were filed. Some were lost. You close it, gently, and listen to the fog settle. You wake to the sound of iron gates creaking, not like a scream, but like a sigh, slow, resigned. The kind of sound you imagine time itself might make when giving up. There's a fog clinging to your coat, and to the corners of your thoughts. The streets are empty, save for the occasional flicker of a match as a constable lights his pipe. You follow a narrow path between brick buildings until you reach a tall one with a brass plate that reads, Institute for the Moral Improvement of Idiot and Backward Youth. No one's trying to hide the judgment. They've just wrapped it in velvet syntax. Inside, everything smells like chalk dust and beeswax. A group of boys sits on stools arranged in a circle, each holding a slate. Their feet dangle inches above the ground, socks mismatched. A man in a dark coat claps his hands and says, Gentlemen, today we shall recite the first 12 names of the apostles. Some respond immediately, proud, loud, others blink. Pause. One boy mumbles Simon. But it's unclear whether he's answering or guessing. Another stares at the ceiling, utterly entranced by the flicker of candlelight. The man claps again. Focus, boys. Even the simple can be useful if properly ordered. There it is again, that Victorian philosophy of usefulness. You see it in the lesson plans. Boys are being shaped into shoe shiners, valets, chimney sweeps. Girls into laundresses, menders, silent companions. No one here is aiming for joy. Just containment, just silence, and you realize this century fears chaos more than cruelty. You're led to the girls' dormitory, where the walls are a soft rose color and everything smells faintly of lavender and starch. A girl with Down syndrome stands at a window, tracing raindrops with her finger. She's fond of the weather, the matron says. Keeps her quiet. If she grows too excitable, we give her a valerian. The room is full of whispers, some from the girls, some from the floorboards. One hums a tune you don't recognize. Another murmurs to a broken doll. One lies still with her eyes open. Blinking once every 10 seconds, they are alive. Present. Processing, but the world they live in wants them in the background, like wallpaper. Pretty, static, untouchable, you open a ledger. Each girl's name is followed by a brief description: simple, manageable, compliant. Wanders. Aggressive, but sweet when sung to. Unsuitable for marriage. There's an unspoken belief here, that marriage is the reward for being normal. And those who fall outside the bounds are expected to compensate by being invisible. Still, some girls resist. You find a note in the margins: patient 103 attempted to escape during chapel. Claims to have seen her mother in a passing carriage. Screamed for 10 minutes. Restrained and calmed. Calmed, you think, is doing a lot of work in that sentence. You sneak out of the dormitory and follow a thread of music into a chapel. A hymn echoes off stone walls, disjointed but sincere. You see them, half a dozen residents, rocking slowly as they sing. The words are muffled, some distorted. But there's something pure in the sound. No one is listening for perfection. Only rhythm. Breath. Company. A young nun places a hand on your shoulder and says, they like the chapel best. No one makes them read here. You leave the building and walk until the street narrows and swells again. Into one of those well-manicured squares where respectable women walk their nervous little dogs. Lace curtains twitch as you pass. The fog is lifting, but only slightly. Here, the concealment is more refined. You enter a townhouse owned by a well-known family, the kind that publishes birth announcements but not obituaries for infants who lived under a year. Inside, the silence is warm, wood-paneled, perfumed with rosewater. A governess offers you tea. You ask about the second son, the one rumored to be sickly or not quite right. She hesitates. We don't speak of him often, she says. He lives in the attic. Read books about clouds. Sometimes sings to the cat. You climb the stairs. The room is filled with paper mobiles, clouds, birds, folded stars. The boy sits by the window, whispering to a canary in a gilded cage. He doesn't look sickly. Just uninterested in your presence. You nod toward him. The governess smiles faintly. He doesn't come to dinner. But he's very peaceful. And that, you think, is what they mean by success here. Peaceful. Quiet. Contained. You look out the window. Across the square, another child watches you from behind. You wave. They blink. Then disappear. At a public exhibition hall later that day, you stumble upon something jarring, a scientific display of mental deficiency, sponsored by one of the emerging eugenics societies. There are plaster busts, labeled by type. Drawings. Charts of cranial slopes and jaw widths. One glass case contains photographs, children, posed stiffly, their diagnoses scrawled beneath like museum labels. You feel the air leave your lungs. This isn't curiosity. This is categorization masquerading as science. And it's gaining popularity. Across universities and lecture halls, the idea is catching on that some people are biologically unfit, not just to thrive, but even to exist. There's a pamphlet on a stand titled The Burden of the Defective. You don't open it. You don't need to. The message is clear: eliminate differences to purify society, and they start with labels, then institutions, and soon, sterilization laws. You step outside into air that now feels thinner. Colder. Victorians smile as they sort. As they press lives into definitions. And press those definitions between glass slides like insects, you find yourself in a rural churchyard at dusk, among graves marked only with numbers. Some are no longer legible. The caretaker tells you these belong to a charitable hospital. Names were recorded in ledgers, but stone was expensive. And most families never visit it again. You crouch beside one plot where a violet blooms anyway, you don't know who they were. But someone planted a flower. Someone remembered. Not all were erased. Even now, you can't help but wonder how many were hidden in novels, diaries, letters. Hints of eccentric cousins, invalid brothers, or quiet girls with vivid eyes. You remember reading Dickens and noticing a boy called Simple who is kind, but doomed. Or Wilkie Collins, whose heroines are always fragile but wise. You wonder, were any of them based on someone real? Someone erased, and what happens when erasure becomes tradition? You think about the girl at the window, tracing raindrops. The boy with moths in his mind. The canary singer. They didn't disappear, they were boxed, labeled, muffled, but they sang anyway. And if you listen hard enough, you can still hear them beneath the wallpaper. Behind the polished mahogany. Under the velvet curtains, whispers that say, I was here, still am, still humming. You wake in a haze of pipe smoke and beeswax polish, somewhere between a boarding school and a museum. The place smells like certificates and damp wool, and everything is overlabeled, drawers marked trigonometry sets and emergency spill bucket, and, more grimly, invalid desk, do not assign. You blink at that one, and the administrator beside you chuckles nervously, poor lad couldn't keep up. We've sent him to the countryside. Fresh air, you know. The desk looks perfectly fine. Just a bit scratched. Like someone had clutched its edge too tightly, too often. There's a lesson in that, though no one here seems to want to learn it. You trail behind a headmaster with mutton chop sideburns and a fondness for euphemism. We do our best for the afflicted, he says, as if affliction is a manageable product line. In one room, a boy recites poetry with mechanical fluency, but when the teacher praises him, he bursts into tears. No one comforts him. A bell rings, and they all rise. They rise with practice, like soldiers. Or puppets. You move through corridors of uniformed children. Some stiff-backed, eager-eyed. Some dreamy, blinking into space. Occasionally, a hand strays toward yours, tentative, and is quickly pulled back by a matron's disapproving stare. Touch is not encouraged. Understanding is dangerous. Kindness is inefficient. You peer into an office labeled educational triage. Inside, a teacher cross-references files, exam scores against head circumference measurements. There's a separate ledger for likely degenerate traits. One child is marked clever, but fidgets. Another, mute and uncooperative, possibly heritable. You don't know which fate is worse, being labeled or being labeled contagious. Outside, the school flag flaps over a courtyard. Children run in jagged lines. One girl spins until she collapses, giggling at the sky. A boy with untied shoes skips after her, trailing laughter and disregard like falling leaves. Their joy is momentary. A whistle blows, and they snap back into order. The Victorian system admired order more than innocence. You duck into a side alley, unsure if your chest aches from the fog or from something else. It's hard to say. You've seen too much sameness today. Too many rows. Too many children sorted like silverware, forks, knives, and those odd mismatched pieces tucked away in the back drawer. At the end of the alley, a girl in a tattered blue smock offers you a flower made from scrap paper. "For tuppence," she says. Her eyes are sharp. Too sharp. You buy the flower. She grins. I make better ones at night, when the voices stop arguing. You ask if she goes to school, she shrugs. Mum says they'd put me in a coat with straps. Her smile is not quite sad. Just tired of being clever enough to avoid help, you wander into a hospital next. This one looks more modern, white walls, chrome fixtures, glass everywhere. But the spirit is Victorian. Sterile compassion. Quiet containment. They have a new term now, training colony. The children are referred to as residents, and the staff wears uniforms so crisp they look starched with authority. You meet a doctor who speaks with pride about routine, breakfast at 7, crafts at 8, singing at 10, silence after lunch. Some thrive, he says. Structure is kindness. But you notice the absence of music between the prescribed singing hours. You notice how all the art on the walls looks the same, sunshine and trees. Copied again and again like someone feared variation was a sign of decay. In the corner of one room, a boy hums to himself. It's a strange, staccato melody, not on the schedule. A nurse turns sharply and shushes him. That's not your time to make noise. He looks at his feet, and you look at the nurse, wondering how much of her life was trained out of her, too. As dusk falls again, you find yourself at the threshold of a grand hall hosting a charity gala. Men in tails and women in swan feather fans sip sherry and nod to each other with practiced benevolence. Tonight's event supports the education and domestication of the mentally unfit. You flinch at the phrasing. A pamphlet is pressed into your hand, extolling the virtues of civilizing the burdensome. It reads like a eulogy disguised as celebration. There's a musical performance by a choir of children from the local asylum. They sing well. Too well. It's the sound of discipline, not delight. The audience claps with the tenderness of people congratulating themselves. You slip outside before the speeches begin. There's only so much orchestration you can take. In the shadows of the hall, you find an elderly man sitting alone on a stone step. He's whittling a piece of wood with precise movements, each cut revealing a curl of possibility. He tells you he once lived in the retard school. That's the word he uses, and you feel it hit like a bruise. Wasn't so bad, he says. They fed us. We got boots. You ask what he liked best. He thinks for a moment. Tuesday afternoons. The sun came through the window just right. You could watch the dust float like stars. That, you realize, was his freedom. A pocket of quiet the institution didn't own. You ask if he ever left. He shrugs. Eventually. They said I was too old to help anymore. He hands you the wooden carving, a bird with lopsided wings. You keep it, he says. Doesn't fly, but it remembers. Later that night, back at your lodging, you stare at the bird. You think of all the ways this era tried to name, tame, and erase children who didn't fit into their embroidered boxes. How much effort they spent inventing euphemisms for imprisonment. How many terms they crafted to sound like mercy, while quietly closing doors. They never said disposable. But they whispered unmarriageable, untrainable, unblessed. And always, they used silence as structure, but you've heard too many whispers tonight to unhear them now. The giggles behind the iron fences. The hums in the chapel. The rustle of paper flowers sold in the alley. You lie back, the carved bird on the windowsill, facing the stars, and as the candle flickers out, you almost think you hear music again, not from a choir. Not from a clock. Just one off-key child, singing anyway. The song stays with you, long after the stars have slipped behind cloud banks and the street lamps cast pale halos on cobblestone. You hear it, that melody stitched from defiance, not approval. No notes written down. No baton conducting. Just breath and hope and the need to make sound, even when the world insists on hush. By morning, the candle has burned itself into a pool of hardened wax. And the carved bird lies crooked on the sill. You lift it again, feel the soft weight of someone else's memory cradled in your palm. In the grain of the wood, you swear you can still feel the pulse of that Tuesday sunlight. You walk the city as it wakes. Horse carts clatter. Newspaper boys shout. Somewhere, a bell tolls 9. But the schools remain closed today. It's inspection day. Not for the children's sake, of course. For reputations, you drift toward one of the more progressive institutions, drawn by rumors of open-air therapy and industrial training. The gates are iron, the gardens neat. A brass plaque boasts of charitable innovations for the mentally inferior. You pause at the word inferior. wondering how such polished optimism can rest so easily beside contempt. Inside, the children are busy. One group stitches canvas bags in tidy lines. Another practices sweeping. Teaches order, the supervisor explains, watching them with arms folded and satisfaction sewn across his brow. Many of them enjoy it. You want to ask, enjoy it, or comply with it. But the question feels too large for this corridor. In a classroom, a girl with a lazy eye and unsteady hands traces letters in chalk. Each stroke wobbles, then writes itself. She erases nothing. Just starts again. You stay long enough to see her spell her name. It takes 13 minutes and a dozen sighs. She doesn't notice you watching. She just finishes the last letter and smiles. Later, you hear her being praised for being a good example for the others. The others, a boy sits alone under a desk, chewing the corner of a composition book. His file, left carelessly open on a nearby chair, reads, "Little capacity. May benefit from kitchen exposure." Like a potato, you close it. Out in the courtyard, someone has spilled buttons. Dozens of them, red, silver, mother of pearl. A girl crouches over them, arranging them into constellations. Orion's belt. The plow. Maybe one's of her own invention. A staff member strides over, mutters that's not productive, and scoops them all back into a tin. She doesn't cry. She just stares at the empty stones where her stars used to be. You're starting to see it now. Not just the neglect. Not just the cruelty. But the theft, of time, of expression, of the right to make one small, private universe and have it left alone. You visit the music room next, more curious than hopeful. A piano sits under a velvet cloth. Dust coats the keys. Only used for annual pageants, someone offers helpfully. When the mayor visits. But a boy is already there, thin, dark-haired, eyes deep with the quiet of unsaid things. He lifts the cloth and presses one key. Then another. Then two together. You stand still as he finds a rhythm, crooked, halting, but unmistakably real. It's not a tune anyone will recognize. It's not on any page, but it's his. You leave him there, playing for no one, and wonder how many songs were written and forgotten in rooms like this, how many paper flowers never sold, how many carvings never given away, how many children never seen because their gifts weren't symmetrical enough to survive. Down the hall, a boy with a stammer repeats his name into a mirror. Over and over. You don't interrupt. You know what that costs. Someone tells you it's time to leave. The inspection is over. The children have performed their normalcy for the day. Everything is in order, but outside, the sky has changed, and that song, the one you thought you'd only imagined, is still trailing in your ears like an unfinished sentence waiting for someone to believe in its ending. You wake in a cold room with flickering lights, the hum of distant machinery vibrating through your spine. It's not night anymore, but it feels like it. The window is small and too high to see through, like someone designed it for light, not for looking. You pull your coat tighter and open the door. Outside, the hallway smells of disinfectant and something older, metal, maybe, or memories that forgot how to breathe. The year is somewhere between the wars. Not that it matters. You can already hear the slogans marching before the boots do. The first place they take you is a school, but not a school like you remember. It's part classroom, part laboratory. Children sit at desks arranged in rows like crops. And a man with a narrow smile points to charts on the wall. You see silhouettes of heads, wide jaws, sloped foreheads, exaggerated ears. Each is labeled, criminal, moron, degenerate. There's one marked feeble-minded type, as if minds were fruit that had bruised in shipment. You stand very still. The man talks about heredity like it's plumbing. Leaky traits. Bad stock. And how to repair society through smart breeding and firm control. He calls it science. Everyone nods. They always do when someone wears a white coat. You leave the classroom before the lesson ends, but the hallway doesn't offer relief. A display case boasts awards for excellence in mental hygiene. A framed certificate reads, "Awarded to the state for leading efforts in the prevention of genetic decline." You think of the girl from earlier, the one who counted flower petals under her breath. Would she have been pruned from the family tree? Probably. You take the stairs 2 at a time and emerge into sunlight, but it doesn't feel warm. Outside, a mother pulls her son along by the wrist. He resists, not in tantrum, but in rhythm. His body moves to a beat no one else can hear. She hushes him with too many apologies. Ignore him, she tells you. He's not like this all the time. You nod, unsure of who the lie is for. A poster on the wall across the square says, "Protect future generations, know your bloodline." There's a drawing of a perfect family, 2 blonde children, straight teeth, wide smiles. Underneath, the tagline, "Fitness begins at home." You board a train. It's not fast. Not elegant. But it moves like it has orders. The seats smell like mildew. Someone has carved initials into the armrest, 2 letters and a date, 1927. You don't know who they were, but you feel them in the dust. The man across from you folds a newspaper titled The American Eugenics Review and sighs with satisfaction. They're making progress in Virginia, he tells no one. The law passed. Forced sterilizations. About time. You don't respond. You just look out the window as cornfields blur into factories. When you arrive, the first thing you see is a gate with decorative ironwork, elegant, almost lovely. The words above it, "State Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded." Inside, a white building gleams like something out of a postcard. It's clean. It's quiet. It's wrong. A nurse leads you past a group of girls folding laundry. Their hands move automatically. One hums a lullaby you half recognize. Another glances at you, then back down, and keeps folding. You want to ask her name, but the nurse talks over you. They're sterilized on arrival now. It's safer. Less temptation. Less risk to the bloodline. You stop walking. You stare. She says it like it's a rule about shoes on wet floors. Upstairs, you find the records room. You flip through folders labeled by number, not name. Some have notes in red ink, compliant. Prone to delusions. Suitable for institutionalization. One is marked, pregnancy averted by timely intervention. The subject was 14, there's a file for Carrie Buck. You recognize the name. She's the reason all this became legal. She was declared feeble-minded, though she wasn't. Her daughter, Vivian, was described as not quite right. No one ever checked. No one needed to, the court ruled anyway. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. You closed the file with shaking hands, and still, it wasn't just one country. It never is. You crossed the ocean. Europe looms like a lesson everyone forgot to learn. Germany is clean, precise, ambitious. The flags are new. The slogans are efficient. The science is purposeful. You're taken to a clinic in Berlin where everything smells like soap and certainty. A doctor gives a tour with rehearsed warmth. He shows you a room with pastel walls and drawings taped to windows. A child plays with blocks in the corner, unaware he's being watched like a case study. We're cataloging. The doctor explains. Soon we'll identify all unfit cases. Prevent suffering. Prevent costs. It's humane. You ask what happens after cataloging. He doesn't answer, but you already know. There's a government memo on his desk. Operation T4. It reads like any other program, schedules, transports, personnel, only this one kills children, mercy deaths, they call them. Euthanasia for the unworthy. The first to die are infants, those with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, deformities. Parents are told the babies died of pneumonia. Or that the bodies were unavailable for return. You travel to Hadamar next. The building looks like a monastery. Ivy climbs the walls. Birds nest in the eaves. But the air is different. You walk past a waiting room where families once sat with hope. Past a registry desk. Into a chamber that smells of bleach and metal. This is where they experimented with gas before the death camps perfected it. Where thousands were relieved of their burden, you run your fingers along the wall. The paint is newer than the history. Outside, there's a memorial stone. It says, "To the victims of National Socialism," but the victims had names: Gisela, Heinrich, Marta. They just weren't written down. You take refuge in a village where a priest risked everything to shelter those marked for death. He hid them in cellars, fed them from the parish garden, taught them songs in secret. One girl called him Papa Sky. He was executed in 1943, she survived. You meet her in an apartment full of books. She shows you the song she wrote afterward, no lyrics, just melody. Notes that climb like they're trying to forget gravity. She tells you, "They thought we couldn't remember." You tell her, "But you did." Back in America, the war ends. The headlines change. But the policies don't vanish. In some states, sterilization continues quietly for decades. By 1950, tens of thousands have been affected. Many are women of color. Poor. Isolated, their forms are signed by guardians. Or forged. You visit a clinic in North Carolina. The nurse offers you coffee. She thinks you're from the state board. You ask how they decide who gets sterilized. She says, "Behavior. Family history." Sometimes we get referrals from schools. You ask if the patients understand. She frowns. We give them information. Whether they comprehend it is complicated. You leave without drinking the coffee. Later, you meet a woman named Lena. She was 16 when they took her appendix and her future. They told her it was routine. "I didn't find out until I tried to have a baby," she says. Her voice is flat. Not broken. Just used up. "I would have been a good mom," she adds. You don't doubt it. In the archives of a Midwestern hospital, you find a ledger dated 1933. The pages crackle like old bones. Entry after entry. All girls. Most young. Each marked with a procedure code and a single comment: excessive imagination. Low utility. Unmarriageable. You want to burn the book. But you don't. Someone might need to read it. Someone might not believe this happened. You've lost count of how many. This time, you sit next to a young man with a backpack full of markers. He draws superheroes on the window fog. They're all smiling. One wears glasses like his. You ask if he likes school. He shrugs. Sometimes. You ask what he wants to be. He thinks. Happy, he says. You don't cry, but something inside you unfolds like an apology. You're not sure to whom. Maybe to everyone, maybe to yourself. You find yourself in a kitchen, not grand, not stylish, just deeply lived in. The linoleum is cracked in one corner, and the wallpaper is fading around the light switch. But there's warmth here. You smell coffee. You hear a radio humming something soft and hopeful. And over at the table, a woman sits with her hands clasped around a mug that's gone cold. She's reading a letter. It's from a school. It says her son, age 8, curious, obsessed with trains, is unfit for education. That he would be better placed in a residential institution. It says he will never read. That he will not benefit from further classroom attendance. The woman folds the letter neatly and slides it back into the envelope. Then she gets up, finds a blank piece of paper, and begins to write her own. She doesn't know it yet, but this is how a movement begins, not with microphones. Not with banners. But with a mother deciding her child deserves more than rejection dressed as science. you step out of the kitchen and find yourself in dozens more. The suburbs stretch like veins across America, and inside these modest homes, similar stories are unfolding. Parents meeting over potluck dinners. Trading horror stories. Swapping names of doctors who actually listen. Whispering that maybe, just maybe, they're not alone. They write newsletters. They organize coffee mornings. They call the newspaper. They pick up the phone and keep calling until someone somewhere listens. It's slow. It's exhausting. But it's louder than silence. In 1950, you attend a gathering in Minneapolis. Not a protest, not yet. Just a room full of chairs and folding tables and parents who have learned to say my child has Down syndrome without flinching. Some bring their children with them. One boy flaps his hands when the ceiling fan turns on. Another spins in slow circles, beaming. No one hushes them. No one looks away. This is new. They call themselves the National Association for Retarded Children. The language is outdated now, but the love is timeless. What matters is the mission, to demand that their children be seen, taught, welcomed. Some members are teachers who've quit their jobs out of frustration. Others are grandparents raising grandkids because institutions took their daughters. One woman quietly passes around a petition. It calls for appropriate public schooling for all. The idea seems almost radical. You hear stories: a child excluded from church Sunday school. A teenager denied braces because he won't live long enough to matter. A girl sterilized during a routine appendectomy. No one asked the family. The stories pile up like kindling. No one's yelling yet. But the match is in the room. You drift forward a few years and land in a courtroom. The walls are heavy with portraits of old men in wigs and scowls. But today, something different is happening. A mother is speaking, firmly, calmly. She's explaining why she sued the school board. Because they told her that her daughter would be better off in a facility. Because the teacher laughed when she asked for textbooks. Because the bus never came. This is Park v. Pennsylvania, and it's 1971. She's not alone. Dozens of families have joined her. The judge listens. The lawyers argue. But something in the room shifts. The court rules in their favor. Children with intellectual disabilities, the judge says, are entitled to a public education, and just like that, the wall cracks. 1 year later, Mills versus Board of Education in Washington, D.C. Another victory. The ruling states that lack of funds is no excuse to exclude children with disabilities. The dominoes start to fall. You feel it. The world tipping. Slowly, back in a kitchen, another mother sits with a typewriter. Her name is Eunice. Her brother, Rosemary, was born different. Not a euphemism, just different. She was eventually institutionalized. Silently. Without choice, Eunice swore it would not happen to others. She starts a summer camp in her backyard. Children with developmental disabilities run, swim, sing. She watches them, learns from them, and tells everyone who will listen that they deserve joy. Eventually, she founds the Special Olympics. You visit one of the early games. A boy stumbles in the race. The others stop. One goes back. Helps him up. They cross the finish line together. The crowd erupts. It's not about speed. It's about visibility. You remember that, long after the medals are packed away. Meanwhile, in legislative offices and university conference rooms, the language begins to shift. Mentally defective becomes developmentally delayed. Feeble-minded is quietly retired. Doctors start writing child with Down syndrome instead of mongoloid. The shift is slow. Some people resist it, but others fight for it, because they know words are gates. Open the language, and more children can walk through. In 1975, Congress passes the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. It requires that all public schools accept and accommodate children with disabilities. It's not perfect. But it's federal. And it's law. You visit a classroom the next year. A boy with autism is tracing dinosaurs in pencil while a girl with cerebral palsy reads aloud. Their teacher adjusts as she goes, calm and slightly over-caffeinated. You notice a bulletin board labeled "Everyone Belongs." You smile. It's not just decoration anymore. At another PTA meeting, a father stands and holds up a photo of his daughter. "This is Amy," he says. "She loves swimming. She hates broccoli. She learns differently, not worse." The room goes quiet. It's not a speech. It's a declaration. Outside the courtroom, outside the schools, a different kind of resistance grows. It's quieter. Harder to see. Some institutions don't want to change. Some neighborhoods whisper behind curtains. Some doctors still suggest alternatives when a prenatal diagnosis comes back, but the families are louder now. They're on TV. They're in the paper. They write books with titles like "Expecting Adam and Giants in the Nursery." They post photos on bulletin boards, then on websites. They say things like, "He is not a tragedy." And, "She is our joy." And, "I wouldn't change him." And the world starts to believe them. You find yourself in a community center. There's music. Art. Dance. A girl with Down syndrome leads a yoga class. A boy with Fragile X syndrome is teaching chess. Parents sit nearby, sipping lukewarm tea, chatting about IEPs and therapist waitlists and how their kids don't sleep. They're tired, but not broken. One mother catches your eye. "We used to whisper," she says. "Now we march." She holds up a photo, her daughter in a cap and gown. Smiling like the future never had doubts. You ask what changed most. She doesn't hesitate. Us. The parents, the ones who learned the system was designed to exclude, and then rewrote it. The ones who taught doctors how to listen. The ones who refused to institutionalize their children even when neighbors said they were selfish. The ones who sued school boards. The ones who stayed up all night writing letters. The ones who kept the coffee warm and the lights on. The ones who, again and again, said, "No more, not my child, not any child." You slip into a classroom just as the bell rings. It's the 1980s, and fluorescent lights hum above rows of mismatched desks. The floor is speckled tile, the walls are papered with grammar posters and hand-drawn planets, and the air smells like pencil shavings, dry erase markers, and something fried from the cafeteria downstairs. A girl in the front row chews the cap of her pen while another hums softly, tracing the grooves of her desk with one finger. The teacher, Ms. Kelly, stands at the chalkboard looking like she's already lived through one disaster today and is quietly bracing for the next. This is her first year with a fully integrated classroom. 5 of the students here are officially marked special education. And she has a folder on each, fat with IEPs, assessments, notes from speech therapists and occupational therapists and resource coordinators she's only met once in a hallway. She was told it would be challenging but rewarding. She was given a half-day training and a laminated booklet titled "Inclusive Excellence, Tips for a Unified Classroom." The cover has a stock photo of a smiling child in a wheelchair giving a thumbs up. That's it, no extra aid. No budget bump. Just a bell, a mandate, and a room full of kids, some who don't speak, some who don't sit still, some who already know they're seen as other. Ms. Kelly takes a breath, picks up a piece of chalk, and writes the word "difference" on the board. She underlines it once, then she turns to the class. "What comes to mind when you hear this word?" She asks. A few hands shoot up. Most don't. One boy is lying under his desk, humming. Another stares at the ceiling. But they're all listening. Somewhere in this messy space, inclusion has begun. You wander the halls of other schools. Some have resource rooms at the end of long corridors, often beside the boiler room. Others have pull-out programs, which sound like they involve parachutes but mostly involve kids quietly disappearing during math and returning during art. you peek inside one such room. A small group of children is gathered around a low table. The teacher is reading aloud while a girl with a pencil gripped in her whole fist colors the same flower again and again. The boy beside her repeats the teacher's last word in a whisper, every single time. "Bridge," says the teacher. "Bridge," the boy echoes. "River. River." He taps his pencil 3 times after each word. No one tells him to stop. Later, you hear someone mutter in the hallway, they slow the class down. But when you watch closely, it's the opposite. These kids bend time. They ask questions no one else thinks to ask. They savor pauses. They notice details others miss. They slow things down in a way that makes learning feel alive. One teacher you meet is in her 60s, about to retire. She's worked in special education since the days when mainstreaming was still a whispered goal. She shows you a file from her first year. It's labeled Michael, age 10. Not toilet trained. Communicates by throwing objects. She flips the file closed. "Michael's an engineer now," she says with a grin. Works on HVAC systems. Still throws things sometimes. But only when football's on. The 1990s roll in with bold fonts and hopeful legislation. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, is reauthorized, stronger than ever. The words least restrictive environment echo across school districts. Laws now say that students with disabilities must be taught alongside their peers, to the maximum extent possible. The reality? It's still a patchwork quilt. In one school, inclusion means kids with Down syndrome are part of every class, math, science, lunch, gym. They're given aids, tools, patience. They go to prom. Their faces are in the yearbook. In another school just a town over, inclusion means a life skills room in the basement with a microwave, plastic vegetables, and worksheets about brushing teeth. One girl you meet is 16. Her favorite subject is Shakespeare. Her aide reads Romeo and Juliet with her line by line. She paints her nails blue every Friday and dreams of becoming a florist. She's never been on a school field trip. Why? The bus isn't equipped, they say. You watch her tape flowers cut from magazines onto her locker door, one by one, arranging them like a poem only she understands. In another city, you meet a boy named Noah. His mom fought for years to get him into a general ed classroom. The school said he wouldn't keep up. That his autism would confuse the other kids. That his behaviors would disrupt instruction. She fought anyway. Now he sits in the back row of 7th grade science. He wears headphones and doodles meteors in the margins of his worksheet. He doesn't always make eye contact. He doesn't always answer. But when the class talks about space, his hand shoots up. Actually, he says, voice calm and clear, Jupiter doesn't technically have a surface. You'd fall through clouds. The room goes quiet, then one kid whispers, cool. And something shifts, not everything. Not all at once. But something. You notice teachers adapting in small, beautiful ways. A 3rd grade teacher keeps extra copies of the Read Aloud book, one with pictures, one with extra spacing, one printed on blue paper. She doesn't make a fuss about it. She just hands the right copy to the right kid. Her class scores lower on standardized tests, but higher on kindness. A high school history teacher lets a student give her presentation by drawing it as a comic strip. It's about the French Revolution. Heads still roll. But in pen and ink, they're kind of funny. A gym teacher reworks an obstacle course so that every kid can finish it. The last lap is a victory lap, done together. One boy crosses the finish line in a wheelchair pushed by his best friend, and they both raise their arms like gold medalists. You realize something strange and beautiful. The best inclusion doesn't feel like accommodation, it just feels like school. Still, the work is far from finished. You hear teachers whisper in copy rooms, I'm not trained for this. You read op-eds about special ed kids lowering the curve. You see budgets slashed and aides overworked and parents sobbing in IEP meetings because their child's goals haven't changed in 3 years. One mom tells you, "They keep writing that my daughter is sweet and cooperative. I want to know if she's reading. If she's thinking. Not if she's sweet." You get it, sweet is often code for we're not doing much, but at least she's smiling. You visit one more school. A small one. Rural. Not fancy. The principal greets you with a firm handshake and introduces you to Mrs. Samuels, the special ed teacher who also drives the afternoon bus and runs the garden club. She walks you through her classroom. It's full of motion and music. One boy bounces on a therapy ball while spelling vocabulary words aloud. Another builds a model of a volcano while muttering facts about tectonic plates. A girl sits in a beanbag chair with a picture book, turning the pages very slowly. We meet them where they are, Mrs. Samuel says. Then we walk with them as far as they want to go. You ask her how far that is. She laughs. Farther than most folks expect. As you leave the school, the final bell rings. Students flood the hallways, some sprinting, some shuffling, some being guided by hand or by voice. It's chaos. It's noise. It's life. You see a boy with a communication device showing it to a friend, who presses a button and makes it say, "Want pizza?" They both laugh like it's the best joke in the world. You see a girl with Down syndrome linking arms with 2 teammates in soccer uniforms. Their cleats click on the floor like applause. You see a student with severe anxiety handing in a math test. The teacher accepts it without comment, just a small, proud nod. You breathe in. It's not perfect, but it's possible, and sometimes, it even feels like joy. You stand in a school hallway that could be anywhere, anytime, a place between eras, paved with decades of hope and compromise. The lockers are dented and painted over more times than you can count. There's a poster above the drinking fountain that says, "Be kind," in glitter glue, curling at the corners from steam and age. You hear a bell ring, and kids flood the corridor. Backpacks bounce. Laughter collides with shrieks and wheezes from outdated HVAC systems. A wheelchair glides past you, its small wheels blinking with LED lights. A girl leans against the wall, reading aloud to her tablet. Someone in noise-canceling headphones walks alone, mouthing a script you can't quite make out. This is now. It looks better. Sometimes it is. You visit a classroom where a boy with Down syndrome co-teaches a lesson about maps. He holds a pointer and says, "This one's my favorite, it's a place I made up." The class claps. No one laughs at him. The teacher doesn't rush in to translate or correct. She just waits. The map stays pinned on the wall for the rest of the year. It becomes a landmark. Across town, a girl who doesn't speak writes poetry on an iPad. Her aide reads them aloud during morning announcements. One poem is just a list of colors: brown like tree bark, green like my brother's lunchbox, blue like feelings I don't say. On the playground, a group of boys asks if they can paint her words on the basketball court. She nods. Later, the school paints them in permanent ink. It's easy to forget how hard people fought for this. A parent once sat in front of a school board and shouted through tears, "My child is not your inconvenience." A sister taped her brother's photograph to the state capitol wall with the caption, "This is who you're cutting funding from." A self-advocate stood at a podium and read their own name into the record, not their diagnosis, not their file number, their name, and said, "I am not your metaphor." These small rebellions shape the scaffolding of now. You visit a hospital where babies born with Down syndrome are no longer hurried into side rooms. Their parents are no longer handed leaflets about alternatives before they're handed blankets. Instead, they're given a counselor, a community contact, and time. One nurse tells you, "We changed the script." That's all it took. We used to say, "I'm sorry." Now we say, "Congratulations, you feel that difference down to your bones." And yet, not everything has changed. you meet a high school senior whose IEP still lists goals for compliance as a measure of success. He jokes about it, "Guess I better start nodding more enthusiastically." But there's a flicker in his smile, something hollowed out by years of being evaluated for how well he fits the mold, rather than how brilliantly he shatters it. You meet a college student who has to prove, semester after semester, that she still deserves her accommodations. She sighs. "They don't take away ramps every term, but they make me reapply for extra time on tests." She's tired. But she's still showing up. Progress doesn't mean rest. It means the bar has moved, but you still have to reach for it. In one courtroom, you watch a mother argue for custody of her adult son with a disability. The court assumes he can't choose. Can't live independently. She says, he doesn't need a guardian. He needs a budget and a good bus route. The judge blinks. Writes something down. The verdict is pending. Elsewhere, a young man who uses a wheelchair campaigns for city council. His slogan is "Nothing about us without us." At rallies, people chant it with him. Some of them are holding signs. Others use speech devices that chant aloud in mechanical voices, without. U.S. It's loud. Imperfect. Glorious. You stand on the sidewalk and clap with both hands. It doesn't fix everything. But it adds to the echo. You hear about new gene editing technologies that promise to correct certain traits. It's marketed as compassion, as improvement, as cure. But people who live with those very traits say, "We're not broken." Their voices get drowned in research papers and panel discussions. You hear someone on a podcast say, "What parent wouldn't want their child to be normal?" And you flinch, because normal isn't neutral. It's erasure. Dressed in a white coat, you pass a genetics lab where someone scrawled on a whiteboard, "Just because you can doesn't mean you should." Underneath, someone else has written, "But what if we can do it kindly?" A third hand adds, "Define kind." You stare at the question mark for a long time. At a conference, you watch educators and parents and activists argue over the term inclusion. Is it about placement? Belonging? Measurable outcomes? Philosophical ones? Someone says, "We've made it about access, but not about dignity." Another says, "What if true inclusion is not being noticed at all?" The room falls quiet. Later, in the hotel elevator, you ride up with a teen who's been silent all day. He turns to you and says, "I don't like big meetings. Too many faces." You nod. He grins. "But I like that my mom made them listen to me." The door opens. He steps out. There it is again. The small, perfect sentence that carries more weight than legislation. You walk through the present like it's a corridor made of scaffolding, half built, half rebuilt. Graffiti scrawled in chalk. Tape over broken windows, and somewhere a piano playing a tune no one taught. Some of the future already lives here. You visit a makerspace where a young designer with cognitive disabilities creates adaptive fashion, clothes with magnetic buttons, sensory-friendly fabrics, joyful patterns. She names the brand after her sister's laugh. A store agrees to carry them. Not in a special needs section. Just clothing. At a university, a professor with Down syndrome teaches a seminar on ethics and accessibility. His students take notes and ask good questions. And someone remembered, not perfectly, not completely, but tenderly enough. You've wandered through centuries of silence and noise, of policies dressed up as kindness, of children renamed and retaught and reboxed. And yet, always, always, there was a voice. A song. A scrap paper flower. A Tuesday afternoon when the sun hit the dust just right. You don't need to fix it all tonight. You never did, so rest. Let the unfinished melody of progress hum softly around you. Let the misfit pieces find each other in your dreams. Let the old stories fade like stars behind a veil of sleep, and if you hear a child's off-key song drifting in, don't hush it, just listen, have sweet dreams.